gonna go ahead and call the November 22nd, 2022 regular Board of Trustees meeting to order. Will you please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Mayor Prospect.
Here.
Trustee Hardy.
Here.
Trustee Sorsali.
Here.
Trustee Murphy.
Here.
Trustee Ayers.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Grace and Trustee Butler will be absent this evening.
All right, thank you very much. We're down to, next on our agenda is citizen participation. This is an opportunity for anyone in the public to speak to something that is not on tonight's agenda. Things on tonight's agenda I'll open up for public comment. So right now we have Linda Wilson signed up.
My name is Linda Wilson and I live at 1461 Merlette Street in Berkeley. And I have a couple of questions regarding the budget. Are you going to increase staff for the forestry department and code enforcement in the 2023 budget? And my next question is, it's a line item for the code enforcement and it's their uniforms, and I noticed, I don't understand, is it the actual clothing that they're wearing or is that a different code? Cause it just seemed like the line item for $1,400 for one person was a lot.
Okay, thank you. Is that was all? Okay,
That's
thank
my
you.
question.
Administrator Kirk, do you mind answering about the forestry and the code enforcement?
Yeah, we have a town forester and a full-time forestry tech, so we have a department of two. We're not planning to increase staffing in forestry this year. And haven't had a request from them to do so. I think they can do everything they need to do with their existing staff. And the code enforcement uniform line item is for physical clothing. Uniforms, not quite as expensive as like a police uniform or something like that, but their uniform gear is a little more expensive. I don't think we spent anywhere near that this year, but just gives a little buffer.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak under public comment but did not have a chance to sign up? Sir,
Hello.
if you could come to the front and state your name and address, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Ryan St. Pierre. I'm 2877 Big Thunder Road in Prairie Star. I'm the president of the Metro District up there, Prairie Star Metro District 2. Since the summer, when I was appointed, I've been reaching out to a lot of residents in our Metro District, and there's been obviously a tremendous amount of interest in the commercial district that's supposed to be in Metro District 3. It's honestly the main question that I get asked, which is kind of frustrating because people don't really understand the differences between the two. So the overwhelming, I think, question is there anything that the Metro District, the residential Metro District can do to accelerate the timeline, whether that's through public outreach or for some of the sewer things that are going on because of the capacity limitations that are in place that I know you guys have talked about in the past few weeks. That's been like the top question that's come across the board from residents as we started to do outreach. And the second question is, I think there's kind of a sense of, to be blunt, redheaded stepchildness of being north of 287, and as the sort of person in charge of making sure the residents feel at home in their homes, I'm curious what you guys think might be a good strategy for incorporating Prairie Star more actively into town events and starting to get better interchange going on there.
Great, thank you. Is there any, we'll just go through and then we'll ask questions. Is there anything else you?
No, those are really the two high water points.
Well, thanks for coming out, awesome.
Yeah.
I have been out, so I can't speak to the sewer timeline. Administrator Kirk, do you have any?
There's nothing that can be done to expedite that process. I mean, as an infrastructure project that has some state oversight, it will just take what it will take. Designs to kind of an interim fix to the First Street sewer capacity issues. We've talked about this a little bit, but the First Street sewer main trunk line is basically at capacity. And so there's a short-term fix to be able to pump sewage on the north side of 287 away from that line and back through a different route. And that should be a relatively quick process, and that work's already underway. But it has to go through permitting and construction, and so there'll be a little bit of time there.
Do you have a rough outline of time, do you think? Year?
I think, we've talked about a year as kind of a reasonable timeline. Sometimes, as you guys know, we've talked about permitting issues a lot when we're dealing with other state or federal agencies. Their timelines don't run like ours. And so, we sometimes are at their mercy, but this is a very simple project from a permitting standpoint, I think, at least as I understand it. I'm not a sewer expert, but it shouldn't be a significant delay at the state level.
I heard that there was also an auxiliary pump needed in order to finish the project. Is that part of the permits that you're referring to there? Is that included in that same scope of work, or is it two serialized projects?
I'm not sure which two projects you're talking about,
So,
but yes, a pump
the
station is
connected-
included
yeah,
as
the-
part of the interim
Okay.
project design. And I think from a involvement standpoint, I think just being able to communicate, and it's nice to meet you, so
Yeah,
thanks
yeah,
for
yeah.
coming
No,
tonight.
yeah, really is. If you, with that sewer stuff, I think probably a better thing, just email Administrator Kirk and we can set up a phone call or something to get more in line, more information.
Yeah, I'd love to just increase the bandwidth between, like, we've got 650 residents who are trying to come through us, so I'd love to get a more regular interchange going, cause.
Sure.
You're the first Metro president to come, so I really appreciate,
Oh, yeah,
seeing
sure.
you.
Yeah, I think I reached out to
Generally hard to find, so
somebody
it's
on
awesome
the,
you're coming
somebody
to us.
on the team in the past couple weeks to try and get more, like, we're trying to do meetups every week at City Star for our own residents to get them more active and start doing more committees, so we have to spend less onto our special district management, so that if we can free up 20 grand, 30 grand, like, could we accelerate that timeline, right, from our covenant control stuff? But I don't really know, if it's a 7-figure amount, 30 grand's not gonna move the needle.
Sure.
It's not a cost issue, it's just a timing issue.
When is your meetings, you say at City?
Our next one at City Stars is next Thursday night.
Okay.
We did one last night, and we're probably just gonna keep doing those weekly or bi-weekly, at least through January, as we establish what the sort of regular crop of folks looks like.
Okay,
So,
I have a quick question.
just sort of.
Just out of curiosity, is there anyone at the town that serves as like a liaison to the community, kind of the boards yet, or is that something we could?
I talk regularly with the presidents of some of the other metro districts, they don't come in front of you very often, but it's me mostly, and certainly my door's open. I always make myself accessible, so look forward to getting to meet you
Yeah.
and talk to you a little bit more.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else? All right. Thank you both for speaking. We'll move on now to consent. I'm just gonna read these off. We have the November meeting agenda and minutes, the oil and gas extension suspension approval, Fort Collins Flex Agreement, termination of the 2007 Safeway M&K Investments Agreement, Community Library Board appointments, and thank you for our librarian for being here, and the October board update. The trustees like any of these removed from consent?
I have a question on the flex agreement.
Okay, we'll remove that from consent then. Anything else would you like removed? Okay, is there a motion to approve consent minus the flex agreement?
I move to combine and approve the items in the consent agenda minus the flex discussion.
Second.
Alright, trustee Ayers has moved on this, trustee Murphy has seconded. Clerk, may we roll call vote?
Trustee Hardy,
Yes.
trustee Ayers,
Yes.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
trustee Sorsali,
Yes.
Mayor Karspeck.
Yes, okay. Items under consent agenda that are removed will be considered first, so we have the Fort Collins Flex Agreement. Trustee Hardy.
Yeah, I've been seeing some comments on social media about the scheduling and when the buses come through and people not being able to easily find any information on Flex coming through Berthoud. Some are getting the feeling that it doesn't actually stop in Berthoud when it actually does. We have quite a bit of money contributing to that, and I did go up on the website on Flex to try and check out to see where some of the confusion might be. They have a little line that says Berthoud, but then they have 3 big blue boxes that you can check on for the scheduling. Berthoud's not listed as one of those. It's kind of hidden underneath the Longmont one, where they list 1 Longmont stop, 1 Berthoud stop, and 4 other stops between here and Loveland and the Fort Collins. Or actually, it's like 4 major stops between in Loveland and Fort Collins. So I was just wondering if we can maybe get our own big blue button, I don't know. If they can add that and make that more noticeable, and maybe if we can have some better links in our own community pages on that as well.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it'd be pretty easy to reach out and see what we can do.
So I think we justify the cost of a button on there.
Trustee Murphy?
Just to supplement that, I feel like community outreach, we could definitely advertise our stop a little bit more. So that's all I've got to add.
And then I know Will's asked several times about getting one out of 287, which would be.
Yeah, that one will get us directly to Boulder. That's a good point though.
That's a little bit more
Yeah,
difficult.
you're right, and I think when you look at their maps, the maps are relatively easy. I mean, I've never understood transit maps ever. I don't know why, but it took me like a week to figure out the New York City subway system. You know, like for some reason they don't make sense to me, but
I don't think that's abnormal.
but the maps I think are better outlined. You know, you can see the stop at Mountain and Third. You can see what times it runs and all that stuff. But I don't disagree. There's probably an easier way to display that information.
Because I don't think
We
we
can
have-
certainly make that request to Flex. Yeah.
Because we don't have a link on the Berthoud page, do we? I didn't see one.
Just under our transit page, I think there is a link to transport, but
I think that would be an easy way to fix it too, if there were just the times and the location listed on that, so that they don't actually have to go to the Flex.
that's a fair
Page.
point. Yeah.
Because the easy thing is always
Okay.
just to go on Facebook and go, why don't they stop?
That's a good
They
point.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing it up because I don't check Facebook that often. So
Okay, so that's all my own concern.
Excellent, all right,
Otherwise, everything looked fine.
thank you. Is there a motion to approve the City of Fort Collins Flex Agreement?
I'll move to approve the City of Fort Collins Flex Agreement.
Is there a second?
Second?
All right, Trustee Hardy has moved on this, Trustee Murphy has seconded. Clerk, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Trustee Sorsali,
Yes.
trustee Ayers,
Yes.
trustee Hardy,
Yes.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
Mayor Parsons.
Yes, thank you. Okay, consent has all been approved. We'll move on now to our regular agenda, and tonight we'll start out with the Youth Advisory Commission presentation. Thank you all for showing up tonight.
Mayor Carsbeck,
Yes.
before we continue, I'd just like to remind everybody, your cell phones are supposed to be shut off during a board meeting. It's very important.
Thank you. Welcome,
Okay,
thank you.
Hi. Well, we're the Youth Advisory Commission. My name is Grazia, I'm the chair of the commission. And we're gonna be talking about our event that we did over the summer, Summer Scorch Fest, and kind of giving you all a recap of how that went since you supported us on it.
Awesome.
So how it started, we surveyed Turner Middle School and Berthoud High School students in 2020 and 2021. We learned that a lot of teens found that there wasn't really any town events that were geared towards them. They were mostly geared towards younger children and adults. So we thought that that was something that we wanted to take on, was to create an event for teens to enjoy. And a carnival was suggested in the survey, and we were like, we like that idea, let's do it. So that's how Scorch Fest was born.
Okay, so my name is Kenyon and I'm the co-chair. And I'm gonna talk about the steps that we took. So the first thing that we did after we were presented with the idea of the carnival is like kind of think of like what we wanted to look like.
Can I interrupt you a little bit? Quick, could we get these on our monitors? Sorry, go ahead. We're just looking at an American flag right here. Oh, perfect.
So we found the vendor that we wanted to use and we kind of like got an idea of what we wanted Scorch Fest to look like. So the first thing that we did was we presented this idea to all of you. And we were granted $30,000 to get the idea off the ground. And so we worked hard alongside the help of the Parks and Rec Department and we coordinated rides, food trucks, DJ, we drew a site map, we organized parking and did all the other fun stuff like bathrooms and trash and like paperwork. And we learned a lot of skills regarding event planning and communication that proved vital to the event success. So how it went was, it was pretty good. It was a 2-day event and it was on July 29th and July 30th at the Berthoud Rec Center. The event included 5 rides from our vendor Airbound. We had 3 food trucks and we also had a DJ. And over 500 people were in attendance and we received several accolades from people who just came up to our tent we're like, this is awesome. So the event definitely exceeded our expectations based on attendance. And many community members even asked us if it would be there next year. So here are some pictures that we have. There's some more pictures. Okay.
Hi, I'm Scarlett. I'm the Berthoud Youth Advisory Treasurer, and I'm going to be talking about the budget. So, as you know, you granted us $30,000. Our total expenses ended up being about $24,500, give or take. That was mostly rides, I think about $20,000 of it, and then just followed by other little stuff. Our total revenue ended up being about $1,500, so our net cost was $23,000. For the future, all of our board right now is seniors, so with the new members, we would like to continue this event and we'd like to make it annual, and we're kind of creating a multiple doc thing that they can look at and see, okay, this is how we did everything, and if they want to create an annual thing or change it how they see fit, then they can.
Okay, so that's kind of all for us. We just wanted to thank you all for giving us the opportunity to put on the event. It was the first of its kind here in Berthoud, and we think it turned out really great. And so if the new commission decides to do something like this again next year, we hope that we can count on your support again.
Thank you very much. Trustees, any questions?
Wonderful presentation, thank you.
Yeah, my only comment is being there, that was so cool what you guys did. I hope this tradition can continue, and if it does, I can definitely see it growing. I think the first year anything, it's just getting the word out, but I was a kid that day and I got to do all the rides and it was super fun. So, growing up here, there wasn't much to do. To have an event geared towards kind of older kids is exactly, I think, what we need. So, you guys did a great job. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And just as a little bit of information, as a reminder, I know the board already knows this, but we did include money in the budget for next year for the carnival games.
Awesome. I'm gonna open it up to the public. Does anyone in the audience like to speak to this? Accolades all around. Well, thank you guys.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thanks for coming out tonight. I know you're busy. All right, next on our agenda is the Larimer County sale of the Little Thompson Farm. Thank you for coming out tonight.
Oh, absolutely, glad to be here, and I'm gonna switch this out.
Okay.
Not sure whose it is, but. Thank you. If you let me, what too long. Well, thanks all. All
right.
And there we go. Well, I'm Dalen Figgs. I'm the director for Larimer County's Department of Natural Resources. And I just want to start this evening by just thanking everyone for just a few minutes on the agenda tonight. And the reason I'm here is I want to bring forward really an information item that we've been working on in Larimer County, and it involves the Little Thompson Farm and a concept of a conservation buyer. And I'll describe what that means here in a minute. But in its basic form, grab some water back here, excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely.
In its basic form, a conservation buyer is somebody that sort of knowingly buys a property with a conservation easement in place. And in its simplest of form, it's also a easement that's kind of tailor fit to the situation. So we negotiate an easement with the buyer, put it on the farm and sell it. This idea had been contemplated a long time ago, and now we're finally to the point where we can kind of do it. Excuse me. So we've been working with our open lands, gosh, excuse me.
You can get me going.
I know. We've been working with the Open Lands Advisory Board for the last several months to do this. And that's our citizen advisory board that helps dictate the sale of, or the use of open space dollars. And I'm not sure why I'm so nervous right now.
Don't be.
I know, I do this all the time. I'm following a hard crowd. And also with our Board of County Commissioners to put this concept in place. And so tonight really is, that's what I kind of just want to walk through and go through this and describe what it is. So tonight is really just an update. I wanna emphasize the fact that even though this farm will be sold with the conservation easement in place to a private buyer, it will be conserved in perpetuity through that conservation easement, so it will always be a farm. So I want to provide an update on how we do that. We're gonna use a tool called a request for proposals, because one of the key takeaways from this concept is it's not necessarily the greatest financial gain back to the department. It's the best fit for the department to get the conservation outcomes that we're pursuing. And then I also want to review really just the timeline of the process that we're going through to do this. So just a quick background on the Little Thompson Farm is it's a 200-acre farm owned in fee simple, or owned by the Larimer County Department of Natural Resources. And you can kind of see the land use here, 188 acres of irrigated pasture and then farmstead. We have a pretty significant water portfolio with the farm. It's 125 shares or units of Colorado Big Thompson water, 16 handy ditch shares, and then 20 Dry Creek lateral shares. And the Dry Creek lateral is a conveyance ditch to get water to the farm. So there's no water associated, it just allows us to carry the water that we have. Little Thompson Farm was historically known as the Munt Farm. We bought it from the Malchow family. But it's been farmed really since the 1860s, so it's been in place for a long time. And it's south of Berthoud, just west of 287. And here's really a location map for the farm. And you can see, I don't know if this pointer works, but well, I can't. Anyway, you can see it on the farm next to 287, just south of County Road 6. And the best way to see this farm from 287, it has a very iconic barn, a red barn just about in the center of the farm that was built when the Munts owned the property. And so it's a very visible farm along 287. So the goals of a conservation buyer project, or certainly the goal of the conservation priority project we have right now, is again to place a conservation easement on the farm. And this is a conservation easement that saves the farm in perpetuity, keeps it in agricultural use, so it will not be developed for other uses. We'll transfer the fee title to a buyer, and this is done through this RFP process we'll describe here in just a little bit, but it is a way to transfer the fee title to the buyer where the county would still hold the conservation easement and manage that conservation easement through time. So again, the idea behind this and the goal behind this and how the conservation easement will be written is it will conserve this as farm and agriculture purposes for forever. Forever's a long time, but into perpetuity. We're also going to tie the water to the farm. We have a pretty significant holding of water that we've maintained with the farm. We'll talk a little bit about that. But it'll be tied to the farm and to the conservation values that we describe in the conservation easement. And this includes agricultural values, scenic values, wildlife habitat, historic values, and so forth. And we describe those in the conservation easement. So that water is tied to those purposes as well. We want to identify and select a buyer through an RFP process. And again, it's not the most financial gain back to the department, but the best fit. So it helps us leverage the type of farming we see most beneficial for this particular site, whether it be local food production, but also conservation practices the new buyer may hold. Water conservation, regenerative agriculture, things of that nature. And again, Larimer County will hold and manage the conservation easement over time. And so we also recognize in this particular case that some landowners would prefer a different holder of a conservation easement. So there are other accredited easement holders, Colorado Open Lands, Colorado Cattlemen's, for example, and would be open to the idea of putting the easement in their hands if that's the wish of the buyer. So again, about a 200-acre farm just to the south of Berthoud. We acquired the farm in 2016 at a cost of $8.4 million, so a pretty significant acquisition cost. And as you can see by this slide, it's primarily driven by the cost of water, which is no surprise to anyone in this room. So we purchased with the farm about 240 units of Colorado Big Thompson water, 16 handy ditch shares, and again, those Dry Creek units. One of the things that was done with this farm at its purchase, it really created an opportunity to create a pretty unique water sharing agreement with the town of Broomfield, the city and county of Broomfield. And really was one of the first transfer mechanisms or alternate transfer mechanisms in the state. And what that is you share water with the municipality and it avoids buy and dry concepts around ag. So oftentimes water is pulled from farms. The farm is dried up, the water is transferred into municipal purposes. In this case, the town of Broomfield has the opportunity to take 80 shares of CBT that they sort of co-hold with the farm and use those for municipal purposes 3 years out of 10. And so it's one of those ways that we can share water with the town, but most years keep the water on the farm. And so it's really a unique situation. It's not replicated a lot, but it's starting to be replicated more as water becomes more scarce and buy and dry concepts around agriculture are more of a concern. We also sold 115 units of the CBT to Broomfield outright. And with the 80 shares that's tied to the ATM and the 115 units of CBT sold outright, Broomfield compensated the county $3.8 million for that. There are another 45 shares that we retain as a county that's held outside of the ATM that we still hold. And we are looking to do one of two things with them. One is we don't know who the buyer of the farm will be, if they're gonna come with plenty of water to farm along with the units of water that we keep there. But we're open to leasing them back to the farm. The other thing we'd like to do is use those 45 units of CBT to really leverage another conservation project in the county around agricultural use and maybe find a way to utilize those water shares to create another ATM or another agreement on a farm. We're actively looking at farms to conserve all the time. And the one thing I do want to point out is Bertha did contribute $100,000 toward the acquisition of this farm back in 2016. And so one of the reasons I'm here tonight is just really to share as a partner in the conservation project, kind of the approach that we're taking. So one of the things I also want to point out is at the time of acquisition, the conveyance of the fee title and the farm to a private owner was contemplated at that time. Our typical approach in conserving farmland is to place conservation easements on them and keep them in private ownership. And through the tax credits program the state has, we can conserve farms that way at very little cost to the county. At that time, the owners didn't want to do that. They wanted to sell the farm outright, which is why we ended up purchasing it in 2016. But all the documents that conveyed the farm to the county, put the ATM in place, clearly contemplated the sale of this back. And so why now? One of the things that happened also in 2016 is we extended an agricultural lease to the existing tenant on the farm at that time, Mr. Hicks. And he's farmed it ever since then, up until last year. He's decided to get out of farming in Colorado and has moved to another state. And so we're in between tenants. And this was really a good opportunity for us to take a look at a conservation buyer concept again and see if we could put it together and make it work this time. So the requirements that we've laid out in this request for proposal, the first group under requirements are absolutes. There will be an appraisal done on the farm once the CE is put in place. And the reason we haven't done it yet, as you'll see under criteria, there are options landowners may take and how they respond to the RFP. And so once all of those options are identified, and we understand what the terms of the conservation easement are, we'll appraise the farm, and that's the price we'll set for the farm for that buyer. There's no negotiation at that point. It'll be the appraised value. And there's other requirements that are pretty standard, no conflict of interest, and all the things you see there. Where we really begin to form fit or create this unique situation around a conservation easement comes with the criteria. And these are ways that we may not get we won't get all of these. We may not get most of them, but these are ways that we can score proposals that come to us and really try to find the best fit for the county to achieve the conservation outcomes that we want to have. And so, for example, the type of agriculture, local food production, sustainable ag, regenerative agriculture, things of that nature. If a proposal comes forward with emphasis on that, there's extra points that we can give them into an RFP by really trying to create, more unique farming situation. Conservation objectives are important to us. So again, soil management, regenerative agriculture, ways to conserve water on the farm. Anything along those lines that someone would come to us with would give extra points toward the farm. We want somebody that's done this before. We don't want to, while we cherish and love new farmers, we also want to have success here. There's some other ways we can look at new farmers. The other criteria is, that we have adequate water rights for the farming practice they want to keep. And so oftentimes farmers will have water they can bring to the farm, other CBT or other handy ditch shares that they may have to bring. Or the farming practices they propose with the water shares we leave behind and tie to the farm. We wanna make sure there's plenty of water there. And then last, we're constantly looking to put conservation easements on properties, and so if there's opportunities presented, through the sale of this farm to ease other farms, that in Larimer County, that would be a benefit. So the outcome of all of this, we will perpetually protect the conservation easements on the farm. Ag, water, cultural resources, viewshed. The other thing we'll do is keep a public access to the farm. One of the things that we always try to do is make sure that we leave space for regional trails or a standalone trail system that would be part of this farm into the future. So we will keep a trail easement and a trailhead easement that allows for public access onto the farm once it's conveyed to a private owner. That'll be part of the conservation easement, it'll be part of the appraisal process, but that's something that we'll just keep and maintain. We will permanently tie the alternate transfer mechanism with the city and town of Broomfield to the farm, along with the 16 handy ditch shares and the 20 dry creek laterals. So again, water will be to that farm. The one caveat I wanna place here is to the farm and to the conservation purposes within the county. And the one thing I always remind myself of is forever's a long time. And so we don't know what this landscape's gonna look like in 20 years or 100 years or 200 years. This farm may not be financially viable at some point because it may become isolated, it may be hard to get water to. The Dry Creek lateral is already a tricky ditch for those who live along it know it's hard to get water all the way down through it. But the water will always be tied to agriculture regardless of where that water is delivered. This farm will always be a farm. It may just change its look and become more of a dryland farm or little less of it irrigated or turned to pasture or something like that. Because of the perpetuity nature of conservation easements, they need to be flexible into the future and really be able to respond to the times. And so we write these to try and create that flexibility. Now, the water transfer can only occur with agreements in place with the county and with Northern Water, so it isn't something that happens absent any sort of review. But we did want to leave that in there, and I did want to point that out because I don't want to misstate the purpose of this. But it will always be a farm. It'll always allow agricultural practices, and the other thing we're doing, sort of looking into the future and the flexibility that may be needed, is right now, if you've ever been to the farmstead is pretty close to 287, it's a little busy. And so we don't know if someone would want to live there or create another building envelope elsewhere on the property. And so we, as an option in the RFP process, we've identified a willingness to create a second building envelope. Maybe it's on the west side of the property. We would define what that looks like, the size of it, the number of buildings, the type of buildings, the height of buildings, and make sure they align with the conservation values of the property. The other thing we've contemplated, and this is really looking toward a new farmer concept who wants tenure in a farm, not just a lease of a farm, is the allowance to allow the farm to be divided one time into two farms. Again, we would identify the size of the farm, how that division occurs and how the water will work. But what if someone wanted to create a 40-acre farm for a CSA or local food or farm to table and was working with someone who wanted tenure and ownership in land, not just a lease of land. So there may be some opportunities to do that as well. These are options that those who respond to the RFP have, and each of these change the value of the conservation easement, which is why we haven't placed a value. But right now, we're estimating the value to be somewhere between $2.5 and $4 million for the land and the water, depending on how these options work out. So pretty significant reduction from a 2016 price of $8.4 million. So right now on our schedule, we are, working with our partners. We had this scheduled a few times. We've had some mix-ups, so we're here. The RFP has been released, and we have had pretty reasonable response to it. I think we've met with about a half a dozen local producers that are interested in the farm. We have the RFP open through about mid-December, and we may extend that. There is an option to do that. And depending on kind of the needs of those who respond, or if we have some folks who pick it up later in the process. We'll review the RFPs. We're going to work with two of our advisory boards, the Open Lands Advisory Board and then our Ag Advisory Board, to help in the selection of the RFP process. And then in 2023, we anticipate going through the appraisal process and closing on the farm. And so that's really the future of the Little Thompson Farm, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but again, taking a different approach in the conservation of that farm into the future and putting it back into private ownership is the path that we're on.
Thank you very much. Trustees, any questions? Trustee Murphy?
Full disclosure, I actually did the historical assessment on the structures on that
Okay.
property. What's the plan for those structures, particularly the barn, but there's also like a bead cabin on the property that has some historic value. Is that included?
And a gravesite.
Yeah.
And a gravesite, yes, there is a traveler's grave. Yes, so in the conservation easement, we'll note both. The beach shack is actually owned by the Berthoud Historic Society, and so providing access to the beach shack for their maintenance purposes. It's not in very good shape right now, but it is there. And then the barn itself, we will mention that in the conservation easement to make sure it's maintained into the future as well.
And to start a new farming operation at a separate site, obviously to maybe maintain like the historical integrity of the original farm site is two sufficient?
And I'm sorry,
Is two building envelopes sufficient for starting a new operation in a separate location?
it is, we believe, and one of the things that we want to make sure happens is that agricultural viability remains on the farm, and so the more home sites or the building envelopes, the more we have concern about taking that away. We will allow expansion of the existing farmstead, along 287. I'm not sure how attractive that is. It has one house in the barn and a chicken coop and a few other things. If there's an opportunity to expand that, I mean, certainly with things like greenhouses or something, we would be open to that idea. But right now, we are contemplating just the single additional. And it's really a view shed component as well.
Other questions or comments?
Is there any explanation as to why maybe there's some confusion as to why it was initially thought that this property would not be sold or financially made viable in some form and not kept as what was assumed to be back in 2016? That
Yeah,
it'd be
Great
kept
question.
as it is?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so, when we originally purchased the farm, and it was before my time, so I can only go by conversations that I've had. There were a lot of ideas around the farm, to keep it, and I think because of the purchase of the farm and not the conservation easement, the initial step, really lent itself to really explore options for the county to keep it and maintain it as a farm. Financially, it makes more sense for us to recoup what we can from the farm and reinvest in additional land conservation, put it back into private ownership. And so I think while there was a lot of thoughts and ideas and really some great ideas that came out around the farm, if it were to be kept as an active farm managed by the county, the financial trade-offs were never really contemplated at that time as well. And so we looked at the whole picture and understood the trade-offs coming at traditional open space opportunities. It was really when the Open Lands Advisory Board leaned more toward at that point to go ahead and sell the farm and reinvest the money elsewhere. The other thing from a land conservation standpoint on agricultural land, as you've seen on the price that was paid in 2016, buying farms is a very expensive proposition, and we have a very limited amount of funds to do that. 35% of our Help Preserve Open Space dollars go toward that. We can't buy very many farms, but we can conserve through conservation easements at a lot of farms. And that's really the focus of our effort, is to go ahead and invest in conservation easements, conserve as many farms with water as we can, and that's where we want to focus these dollars.
So are there not other properties in Larimer County's possession that can be sold to do your projects that you're wanting to? Why is this farm in particular being chosen out of all the other properties you have? Is it because it's got so much value in water that you're just cashing out the biggest pot first? Or
No, I mean, we're actually leaving about $6 million behind on this farm to make this conservation outcome work. And so it's not the biggest, most expensive project. It's the oddity in the system, quite frankly, because all the other farms we've conserved that are a farm in their entirety, we've done through conservation easement. So it's really sticking with the original model intent in our open space master plan. If you go back to that document that was adopted in 2015, It lays out kind of the strategy of farm conservation, predominantly being conservation easements. We also did a study about that same time called Our Lands, Our Future, one that we're repeating now, that asked residents of the county, it's a statistically valid survey of the type of lands they want us to spend open space dollars on. Working farms and ranches were the least attractive or least sought after land type they wanted us to conserve. So it really is honoring really the intent of those two, publicly adopted documents of let's conserve lands through easements, let's invest in lands that have more natural settings and trail systems, and in this way we can do both. So it recognizes really the direction provided by the community about conserving farms, absolutely, but investing less. It wasn't the top choice of lands to invest in.
Okay, so that gets into the whole thing of conservation and conserving the farm, but yet here we're talking about subdividing it into 2 lots so they can be sold off as 2 separate entities. It could be adding another building envelope over on the west side. To me, that doesn't say conservation. That to me is making the property something of value so we can cash out money on it, and it's not about conservation.
It's about conservation, and so I'm gonna I guess respectfully disagree in that it allows for flexibility for a new farm to come in and take advantage of the farm in new ways. So it allows different farming practices to occur. There's a lot of new farmers entering the business that want to farm in non-traditional ways. Having a small farm where they own and have tenureship is important. And creating a smaller farm that allows that to happen is still a farm. It's not going to be cut up and subdivided like a housing development, but maybe split in half for 2 farms. Maybe, and we don't know that's going to happen. We've contemplated that. The second building envelope is really to, again, allow someone to stay on the farm in a way that they wouldn't now. And so, again, we don't know if that's going to happen, but that is an opportunity to create a small building envelope. And building envelopes are acres in size, a couple of acres. It really condenses the houses in places, or the buildings in places where it's needed. Fits the view shed, doesn't interfere with the agricultural purposes of the property or the other conservation values. So it really is intended to allow for flexibility so the easement stays viable into the future, that it's not becoming so difficult to farm there, it's no longer a viable farm. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Any questions?
I have a couple questions. Kind of on that note, would if it were to be sold with a conservation easement and then subdivided, I assume all of those subdivisions would fall under the envelope of the original conservation easement.
It would just be one, a single split. And so I really don't like the word subdivision because it implies a subdivision. But a single split of the farm, both would have the same conservation easement attached to them. So it would double the easement out.
Okay. What could the entire property, instead of selling the property and then splitting it, could the county not lease smaller sections of the property to sort of satisfy that interest in smaller tracts of land for different uses?
We've always had that option, and it's always been built into our lease, but we've never been contacted by anyone to sublease a smaller portion of the farm. And so I don't know if the market's there just yet for that. And that's the one thing that could we? Sure. It would take a pretty significant investment in operating capital to do that. We'd probably have to almost hire somebody to run the farm if we had several small leases. But we've not been approached, even though we've sort of openly talked about that was a possibility. So this still allows that same concept to take place. The new owner could lease it. They could split the farm if they chose to. So it really is still there. It's just under a different ownership option if this goes through.
During the discussions about what to do with the property, how much, and I don't know if you're the correct person to ask this, right, but do you know how much conversation was had about altering the use into open space, open lands, or park space?
Converting the farm to.
Yes.
That was never really our intent. One of the things that we recognize with our ballot language is the agricultural component of that. And so since this was a sort of two pieces to this, since it was an active farm, has been forever, when it was purchased, it really intended to stay a farm. It's who owns it became the question. So it was never really contemplated to convert out of agriculture into native grassland or some other use. The other piece of the farm that's unique is the irrigation water that came with it. And keeping that in irrigated ag was important. And so if we were to convert to another land use, then we have an ATM with no home for it to be placed in this base use in a farm. And then other water that we need to figure out what to do from an agricultural standpoint. Could we figure all that out? Yes, but our intent with this was to keep it as a farm and keep it as an active farm with water tied to it. But the other thing we have done is we sort of stayed on the fence a little bit on this particular issue by keeping a trail easement. So even though it may not be a trail through a native landscape, having a trail through an active farm is still a recreational experience or a visitor experience that not a lot of people get a chance to have. So we've done that with a few of the farms in the Berthoud area.
How much, when the current tenant leaves, or is he already gone or going to leave, how much does it cost to sit on the property on a yearly basis? Cause it's, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Not a tremendous amount. One of the things, and we still may, depending on how quickly, so there's sort of two answers to this. We don't know if this is gonna work, so we may go all the way through this process and really not find the buyer that we're after, and we're kind of back to square one. It may also take us a while to finalize all the paperwork and transfer the ownership to a new buyer in 23. If we were to sit on it, we would invest in a cover crop to make sure that the soils were held in place. There are some perennial crops on it, some alfalfa, that we would need to figure out a hay tenant to come in and hay it. But not a tremendous cost on an annual basis.
So in that regard, how can I phrase this? It seems like $5-6 million is a lot to not sit on it for, if that makes sense, right? If it doesn't cost a lot to sit on it, why has the decision been sort of pushed forward to sell it at a $6 million loss?
That's part of the conservation business we're in. Oftentimes before the tax credits came along, conservation easements came at a cost, and we would reimburse the landowner for the diminished value of the farm. And so the farm unencumbered with any conservation easements appraises at $1 million. When we encumber it with a conservation easement, it's usually a 50 to 60% diminished value. So we're accustomed to that, and so it's a long-term investment into a property to maintain its current use. And that's the commitment we've made to our constituents, that's the work we do, is to conserve land.
So I guess my follow-up to that was there's no, I guess perpetuity is a long time, forever is a long time, but there's no interest in if the current proposals don't come in, if no one seems interested in whatever limitations are set up on the conservation easement, there's no interest in just selling the property outright.
No, I would not. Selling it outright without a conservation easement goes against, the commitment we've made through our Help Preserve Open Space. And so that just simply wouldn't be fair to the family we purchased it from, nor, really the community, the public of Larimer County. And so the only way this would be conveyed to a private owner is with an easement. We may wrangle a little bit on what that easement looks like, but it will always be a farm. Is there scenarios that change the approach that we've taken in this particular case in future years if this one doesn't work out? Possibly, but I don't wanna really speculate on that.
So Berthoud, obviously I'm new, so I don't know a lot of the details of the commitment, but so Berthoud put in $100,000 into the original purchase price. What deals can the town see at purchase if the conservation easement goes through, to recap some of that?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways. One, if the town wanted us to reimburse the original acquisition partnership, would be open to that conversation, not opposed to it. If the town wanted to exercise the trail easement, the trailhead, be happy to convey that to the town of Berthoud as well and partner in the construction of that trail system. The Lewis Farm, which is also near Berthoud, we also hold a trail easement on that as well, and we'd be happy to convey that to the town of Berthoud as well. So, and one of the reasons, we're here tonight is just to be transparent about this, and so if the town wants the original $100,000 investment in the Bill Thompson Farm reimbursed, let's have that conversation.
So follow-up question on that then, I think you said there are 45 CBT shares, is that, you sold X amount, I can't remember, 115 to Broomfield. Are you expecting that those 45 shares go specifically to the land for the easement, or is it something that we could negotiate possibly to get first right of refusal on?
That would be up to the Board of County Commissioners. Any conveyance of property is something they need to do. Right now, we are holding onto the 45 shares of CBT as a county, so those are in ownership of the county. We can lease them back to the farm if that's the desire of the new owner, if that happens. We can use them for other conservation outcomes and reach another transfer mechanism with another water district or another provider or another farm would be an option. First right of refusal would be really a question for the Board of County Commissioners. But one of the things, again, our intent is to keep those 45 units of CBT in agriculture in Larimer County and make sure that happens into the future. And so being very careful with how we sort of talk about those shares, because if we wanted to sell them just on the market, we could do that tomorrow. They're very valuable and very sought after, and they would not stay in agriculture. They would be used for water supply for municipal purposes, which nothing wrong with that, but that's not the business we're in. And so we want to try to keep those shares and really work to find other ways to leverage conservation.
Sure. Other questions?
Any questions, just comments?
Go ahead.
Thank you for the education component to this, because I think it's new information that we had this piece of land under conservation easement until I saw it on the agenda, and that's an amazing piece of property. And so I'm so grateful that it's something that we're preserving and that it's gonna be maintained agricultural, and that the water is there for that use is significant, because in a few years from now, that kind of thing will be very hard to come by in our area. So I'm grateful for the creativity to try and maintain that. And I think within reason, another structure on there for whoever's purchasing the property is reasonable. If I was purchasing a farm and wanted to put a structure on there to be able to farm it more properly or updated, that makes perfect sense to me. So I just wanna say thank you for the presentation, and I think the questions were also very informative too, so.
Thank you.
I guess I don't have any questions. Thank you for hosting breakfast too, by the way. That was fantastic. I think there's a lot of suspicion, skepticism, sitting down with you and with other interested parties. I think a lot of that got cleared up, at least for me. I think there's still some out there for others of this is kind of unconventional or and I agree with Trustee Ayers' thought of there should be some or maybe it was Trustee Hardy, but there needs to be some conversation about that 100,000 we put into it. But I think that might depend on who responds to this RFP and what I like the criteria you guys have on that. And if people can hit a lot of those, I think that's the intent. And I agree with you, of the voters. I've heard this called if it gets subdivided like a hobby acres, but I mean, that's still over 80 acres per parcel. So that's a pretty big farm either way, even if you guys divided it. So I would, to see one extra house on there, especially if it was on the west end, I don't even know if people would notice on the west end of it. So to me, it still is a good use of our investment. I would hope if this opportunity came up elsewhere, we'd at least throw 100,000 of county money at it. And so yeah, it's just unconventional. I get you guys' reasoning, especially if this is to leverage other ag money. It is really almost prohibitively expensive to purchase outright. So if you're able to put the easement on it and then resell it, we can recoup some money, especially if you could put it into other ag projects. I think the 100,000 we put into it, this might be a separate discussion, but the farther away that money gets used for other ag preservation, we might wanna have that 100,000 back, hopefully that we can preserve more ag land around here. But I love the idea, the flexibility. I think, this will really help out if you guys really are, committed to selling this, having this flexibility for other farmers. My only worry is that, who has the upfront capital to put 2 or 4 million into a property and then farm it? There's a lot of, it sounds like tenants, I've been reached out to by the old lenders and Lemke told me too, but just the money to get in to buy that is hard. There's a lot of interest in leasing it, but there needs to be someone that buys it and allows that flexibility for the farmer if they're not the farmer themselves. So I think it's just my opinion as one trustee that the town could look into purchasing this ourselves too, especially for that 2.5 million. It seems like a really good deal. And we could work out something with the water too. We're always looking for water and maybe put some of that into an additional ATM, But, so I guess I don't have any questions. I just really appreciated that breakfast too, and you really are been transparent about this. And I had some things in my head thinking of what's your guys' angle driving out there, and then you cleared that all up, and I was okay. I see. I see this as a more viable way of actually getting into more ag preservation is to put these easements on and try to resell them back to the public.
Yep, it is. And one of the things we did, at the start of the sales tax, started in 2019, lasts 25 years, 2043, is we built a financial model that goes all the way through that timeline and understand where our costs are and what we can do with the sales tax dollars. Our long-term management cost is really what drives our budget. Using conservation easements in this way reduces our long-term management costs for these properties, allows us to do more for properties that we do own. And so this is a strategy. It is unconventional. We've not done this before. I've done it in other places that I've worked. This is the first time for Larimer County. But I would also encourage the town board, if there is interest from the town of Berthoud into acquiring the property, we'd love to sit down and have a conversation on what that may look like.
Yeah, my thoughts were there's gotta be some kind of rational nexus if we don't have open space tax dollars beyond what you provide. But we do have parks dedication dollars, and there's gonna be a development pretty much catty corner to that. So it'd have to be a lot of public access and still keep that farm going. But with that trail, if we could get a ditch easement especially, some kind of right onto that dry creek, we could get really close to Little Thompson that way too. So I think there's stuff there worth pursuing, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. If you wanna, sit down sometime and spread some maps out, take a look at it, I'd be glad to have the conversation.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, my only other comment is I think you guys are due for another tax increase, so I'd encourage the Board of County Commissioners to put no one on the ballot. I think it would certainly be a lot of interest by Larimer County residents on approving another, what is it right now, 1/4%?
It's 1/4%.
So,
yeah,
it's not much at all, but it has a big impact when it adds up. So.
It does. We're very thankful to have it. It's a very popular tax and we can do a lot with it. Yeah, we're a growing county, as we all know.
Thank you. Is there anything else from the trustees? I'd like to open it up for public comment, but if any other
Do
questions?
public comment, then we can maybe respond after.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I'll open it up to the public. Is there anyone in the audience like to speak to this? Sir, if you could cover the front too, just for the mic. And name and address again, anyway, thanks.
2877 Big Thunder Road, such a dope address. Question on the the long term, so in perpetuity means long time. Do greenhouses fall under that space? Obviously, you have limitations on the structures that can be built out. Specifically, if you're talking about trails, walking through, open fields is very different than walking through a bunch of, seasonal greenhouse use space. Can you talk through what that looks like?
You bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how greenhouses would fit into this or other sort of accessory sort of buildings would occur within a building envelope. So whether the one that exists now where the farmstead is, the potential new one on the west side or wherever it would locate itself, those would be an allowable building within that building envelope. Size, the scale, all of those dictated. The trail itself is really, we'll hold an easement for a trail and we'll work with the new owner to figure out where the placement of that trail is. That's a pretty plastic piece in that it can move, and so keeping the trail away from active farming if there's a public safety matter, if it cuts a farm field in half, where we don't wanna do that, or puts them into a operational side of the farm, a greenhouse that maybe they're not interested in having the public to. That's really a kind of a negotiated outcome we'll do with the new owner. And so we wanna make sure whatever that trail easement fits the public access need, but also recognizes the farm and trying to avoid creating a conflict where we can, so. But yes, so the greenhouses would be allowable in that building envelope.
Do trails typically, say you're end up splitting it up, do you see a big drop off in the number of uses if you were to say cut across in the diagonal or something like that, where certain types of farming just aren't practical at that scale, or if someone wants to do something that's, mixed, have, event space on those pads, but also do active farming elsewhere, so one space has a lot more traffic than another. Is there a big concern about what the public access has on different types of farming?
There is, and that's the reason that.
Is that in your study? Maybe it's the real question that I'm asking.
Yes, I mean, we would take all that into consideration, and the other things that trails would allow is for it to enhance the experience for the visitor. And so if the farmer wanted to increase walk-in traffic to part of the farm, they could use the trail system to accomplish that as well. And so I think there's just a lot of opportunities that could occur from the trail easement we have, or a trail easement that, maybe the new owner, or a trail system the new owner builds on their own as part of their business model. Again, looking at this forever into the future, we just don't know what all will occur on this particular property. And so we want to ensure that there is public access to the property in a way that's reasonable with the farming operation. But we also recognize that that's going to change a lot of different ways between now and the end of time, whatever that is. And trails can be moved. I mean, they're easily moved. These will likely be natural surface trails, at least to start with. And so creating a trail system and then moving that trail system in future years is a very easy thing to do.
I was over on Boyd Lake and you cut through a cornfield last summer, and I thought it was kind of neat. So I'm guessing that was preserved land, but it is unconventional to have a trail go through it, but I thought it was kind of a neat way to experience agriculture and have public access.
Yeah, and Fort Collins has done some of that as well. They have some active small farms at the kind of the edge of town, and they have trail systems that go to them and go through them. And so it's really a great way. A lot of folks just aren't around farming operations that much and really don't get a chance to see it firsthand. And these tend to be more of a CSA style of farm or a smaller operation, not a very traditional farm. But it does give them a chance to see a farm in operation, but it also gives the farmer a chance to sort of describe what they're doing and maybe even create, stands to sell produce and whatnot directly to the customer at that point. So there's a lot of interaction that can occur.
Anything else from the public? All right, we'll bring it back to the board for final questions or comments. Trustee Murphy.
I'd just like to mirror Trustee Soriselli's comments and thank you for coming. I think we really would like to keep these communication lines open. And I think there's certainly significant interest on the town's part on what happens to this property, whether it's private ownership or we actually move to possess the property. So, thank you.
You bet. I'd be happy to come back as we get further into the process and kind of describe where we are, if that's the desire of the board. Okay, see some yeses.
Yeah, I like the idea too of conserving farms. It'd be great if we could maybe even take this as an opportunity for a couple things, and that is using this as maybe a model or a demonstration to other farms in the area that might be looking at retiring or doing the same thing, and see if we can't maybe cookie cutter the process so that we can get more farms in our area conserved, so that we can preserve that area. And also, I just hope that the sale or any financial gain from this property, it'd be great if it could be utilized more in this area rather than taking it elsewhere, further away. Just trying to keep the money in the system nearby here. I don't know if that's possible or even on the thought planes process of layout. But yeah, more and more people are concerned about our farmland going away and just the look and feel of our town. If there's a way that we can expand that out of the benefit of this, that'd be excellent.
Yep, and I do plan on coming to a meeting with Commissioner Shattuck McNally and talk about farm conservation and what we use and the approach that we take, and describe what conservation easements are and how they work, how they're valued. Hopefully, if there are landowners in the area that are interested in easements, we can reach out to them and provide some information. And it takes a while, but it's a great tool, and we've had some success with it. So we'd love to do more in this area as well.
It was thank you for coming out. It's always a pleasure to talk open space. It's a big interest for us. I was in the back of the old town hall when this was purchased, and I remember one of the trustees saying, why are we investing in this? This is so far out. And now I think we see the value in that 6 years later, and that this is the corner of town. So these buffer zones are really important. And this board in particular, at our retreat, has made a priority to talk about buffer zones and open space and ag preservation. And one of the things we want to do is bring those farmers together and explain conservation easements, have Colorado open lands there. So what you just said lines up perfectly with that. If we could have you and the commissioner here too, and let them know about what the town can offer as far as assistance, and what you guys can do as far as your funding and working together. And I mean, we have a good thing going right now. It sounds like, with all the farms being preserved, and anything we can do to keep that going.
Yeah.
It's the dichotomy with all the negativity sometimes around a lot of the growth in Berthoud, is to show all that we're doing to try and protect the open lands too.
You bet, and we work a lot with Colorado Open Lands and cost share, closing appraisal costs, closing costs with them to lift that burden from landowners. And we commonly work with them, Trust for Public Land, Colorado Cattlemen's, we have projects with them all the time. So we have great working relationships with those organizations.
Yeah, that'd be great, cause they're taking a big hit on the actual retail value of their property if they sold to a developer.
Yeah.
If they could eliminate some of that cost and retain some of that benefit.
You bet.
They're taking the biggest hit out of anybody. If the town or the county could say, hey, we'll help you with some of that. And
Yeah, the
it's
cost
benefit
recovery,
to all of us.
yeah, through conservation easements, with the change in tax credit laws, 90% of the conservation easement is now allowed, used to be 50%. So it does allow landowners to monetize their farming operation in ways they couldn't 5 years ago. So it is pretty valuable.
Thank you. And just one final question. Did you say around 30,000 that you guys take in revenue from the lease?
Yes.
From Hicks? Okay.
Yep.
They're around 30.
Yep, our annual lease rate was in the neighborhood of 30,000.
Okay. Well, thank you. Anything else? Thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry for the stumble on the front end. I have no idea what was going on.
Talking about it. We're the nervous ones up here, so.
So, thanks much and have a good evening.
You too. Thank you. Okay, we'll move right into agenda item number 4, and that's the family medical leave insurance opt-out, and we have our financial director, Cindy Leach, here to explain that. Thank you very much for being here.
Okay, hello everyone. So last board meeting, I did the presentation explaining the Family Medical Leave Insurance Act. And I can just run through this again, just as a refresher. This was a program that was passed by the Colorado voters in 2020. And basically in January 2023, Colorado employers start collecting or sending in premiums on behalf of all of the employees to the state. And then in 2024, employees can begin collecting pay for if they need to take a leave for a major medical situation or a child. The state is allowing local governments to opt out of this program. And if we participate in the program, every employee would have to, we would take 0.45% of every employee's pay, and the town would match that and send that in beginning January. If we decline the employer participation, that means that we would assist employees by taking money from their paychecks and sending it in for them, but we would not actually participate ourselves. And then to decline all participation means that each employee just acts on their own. The town doesn't become involved in whether or not they pay. Each employee can choose to pay on their own. It's the same amount of money whether we do it as an opt-in or if the employee does it on their own. It's no savings for the employee for us to do it for them. It just eliminates the town's liability or responsibility for collecting and reporting funds on behalf of employees. So we are requesting that the trustees vote to decline all participation, which is called opt-out. There is a resolution that you would have to adopt. We send that into the state. It's good for 8 years. Each employee then would have the choice beginning January of 2023 to pay on their own through the state unemployment website. So far, the large majority of the local governments in Colorado are opting out. There's 2 that are opting in, Crestone and Littleton. One, Windsor, has chosen to just assist the employee, and then all those others that are listed there, among others, there's a lot more that aren't listed there, have already chosen or will be opting out. So, without getting into a bunch more, is there any further questions? Clarification?
Just yours?
Yeah, so from last time I had a question as I was thinking about it. I think some of the concerns are that we would be taking the opportunity away from people. And so is there any sort of requirement or any kind of idea that to provide specific information to new employees that, hey, this is a thing that exists. We don't have any say in it, we don't have any interest in it. However, it does exist in case you want to, and here's the website, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, we actually are obligated, once the town chooses to opt out, to notify all of the employees and then give them the information that they would need to be able to do that on their own. And of course, we would be willing to, in payroll and HR, to be able, give them website and even show them where to go. And if we need to help them sign up, it's just that we would not be responsible for collecting that out of a paycheck. So of course, we would do that. It would become part of the employee handbook. So there would be information in the handbook that for every employee, the new handbook that we update every year, this would be included in that.
Thank you.
And for just one more little bit of clarity, I know that the trustees already know this, but just as a reminder, we did notify employees of the last meeting for them to have the opportunity to come and comment in front of you if they wanted to know, or if they wanted to, either for or against. We didn't receive any feedback directly that I'm aware of.
No, I actually had a couple employees that asked that we not do this, just, I won't mention their names, but they didn't really wanna come, but they didn't wanna be forced to have to pay this by the town choosing to opt in. That I just heard from 2 people and that was it.
Any other questions?
Quick question. The employee handbook, is that regularly updated and?
It is, we update it annually. A few years ago, the board voted to give me the rights to update it as the town administrator. So Cindy and I go through with Carla, our HR and risk management coordinator, and update the handbook as needed.
And all the employees sign it yearly?
When we do updates, they all receive it at an all-employee meeting, so they'll be notified of all the changes, actually on December 7th this year, but.
Okay.
Could this be another one of those employee posters you see on the bulletin board?
Yeah. We have a mandatory meeting for the employees on December 7th to go over updates, we go over the budget, any handbook updates, and a lot of times the handbook will include regulations, laws, things that the states passed that we're required to put in there, changes to discrimination laws, that kind of thing. And every employee then signs the thing that they've received the handbook.
Okay. Okay. Thank you about knowing that, I don't need to know the trustees' name or the employees' names, but that does make me feel better that someone has reached out in support of this.
Yeah.
Of opting out, so that was my kind of concern is no one, even, I really appreciate the opportunity, but if I was an employee, I probably wouldn't show up, you know, I wouldn't wanna, it's intimidating, but to hear that people are in support of this is good. I'll open it up to the public. Does anyone wish to speak to this agenda item? Oh, here we come.
I'm the only employee here.
Kurt, talk against it.
I might as well just say, I was just gonna say that the town has very generous leave time and the town's really worked, even when Mike was here, with anyone that had like a family or any kind of issue. So just if you feel, I think that's probably why you don't see anyone here. It's
Yeah,
just,
good.
you know, that's not maybe needed because of our generous benefits and leave time. That's how I feel.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah, and I don't doubt at all. I see happy employees and I appreciate it. I don't want that comment to sound like no one would show up because they're being treated awful. I think walking into town hall, everyone seems generally happy, so you guys do a good job. All right, anything else? Any questions, comments for Director Leach? Otherwise, there's a motion here, I believe.
Did you close the public hearing?
It's not a public hearing.
Oh, I thought you said it.
But it did have to hear testimony and I guess
That's
admin-
correct.
You did it,
Yeah,
you did
okay,
it just
okay.
fine, thank you.
So you open it as an individual.
I am losing the ordinance here, family, oh yeah, is there resolution 2022-14?
I'll read it.
Thank you.
I'll move to approve resolution 2022-14, a resolution of the town of Berthoud approving an opt-out from participation in the family medical leave insurance program.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All right, trustee Hardy has moved on this resolution, trustee Ayers has seconded. Clerk, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Trustee Sorsali,
Yes.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
trustee Ayers,
Yes.
trustee Hardy,
Yes.
Mayor Franklin.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. We good to keep going?
Yes.
Okay, we'll go on to number 5 here, and that is the Park Hours Code Amendment, and this is by Chief Anderson.
Mine's not gonna be as exciting as Cindy's, but this was the ordinance that I brought to you guys for at the last meeting, I believe it was the last meeting. That was for the first reading, and today's the public hearing on it. I just wanna preface that this is important for safety, for citizen safety. It's not to pick out anybody individually, it's just to make sure that our community is safe when they're taking a stroll through the park. There are some exceptions to the rule. If you're just walking a dog or you're just taking a walk, there's no big deal. We're not gonna harass people. This is just to keep the park safe, and also protect the parks from vandalisms and other shenanigans that could happen during the dark hours. I did research times, which is really hard for us because with the changing of seasons, times would be really hard to stick with a hard line of time, like 6 o'clock at night. I'm just using that for an example. It gets dark now pretty early, but when it comes to July, it's still pretty light, and we should be able to leave those parks open until they do get dark. So we decided to go with the dusk to dawn. That goes with the time schedule. So I think that's just more beneficial for anybody that wants to use the parks. So I'll leave that to you.
Thanks.
Yeah, it matches the sign in Fickle already.
Okay, this is a public hearing. Do trustees have any questions for Chief Anderson? can use comments later, but any questions? Okay, I'll open the public hearing portion up. Anyone in the audience wish to provide testimony to this? We have no one, oh, we do have Lynn Larson signed up.
My name is Lynn Larson. I reside at 205 Hubble Street. I understand the goals of this ordinance, especially as Chief Anderson has articulated them. However, I feel the ordinance as written is too vague and too restrictive. I'll make 3 points. One, yes, I've seen dusk to dawn as the hours for other parks, but what do these words mean? For example, does dusk mean sunset, 15 minutes after sunset, 30 minutes, or an hour? I have seen such postings with these kind of timeframes in other parks as well. A similar comment could be made about dawn. I've also seen hours capped at specific times, such as 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., and this is one of those that Chief Anderson just said that he would find it hard to deal with. There is also a term called twilight, I discovered. One can find 3 twilights that vary between half an hour after sunset up to as long as 2 hours after sunset. So there's a whole range of ways we could better define this. Sunset in Berthoud at this time of the year is about 4:30. Sunset on the 4th of July is about 8:30. Weather, phases of the moon, and even shadows from our mountains can affect the amount of light for enjoyment of outside activities. It may be too dark on a cloudy summer day at 9 o'clock for some activities. Yet those same activities might still be enjoyed at 9 o'clock on a cloudless, moonlit fall evening. I can remember when I was young, our Boy Scout troop used to play capture the flag under a bright full moon in the fall. 3, confining evening activities to walking, jogging, or bike riding is much too restrictive. I've seen young folks and families enjoying many activities at the playground, in the grassy areas, on the basketball court, etc. at Pioneer Park well into the evening. Many in our neighborhood gather on the Pioneer Park Hill on the 3rd of July to watch the town fireworks. These are activities for which the parks are intended. There's always a struggle in many things to balance liberties and safety. Either can be overdone to the public's detriment. Please consider a better definition of dusk to dawn and a more lenient description of loud evening activities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Would anyone else like to provide their public testimony that did not sign up? Okay, I'll go ahead and close the public portion of the hearing, bring it back to the board. Chief, do you have any interest in answering those, or kind of the Mr. Larson called the vague language, or anything, any thoughts to add to that?
No, I'm not gonna argue with Mr. Larson, there's no way.
Yeah, I won't argue with Chief Anderson.
He makes a good point, is the definitions. The problem with getting too strict on definitions is it makes it harder for us to have flexibility. If someone's at Pioneer Park, you said, Lynn, watching the fireworks, who cares? That's not the issue. They're not there to cause problems. If they're playing pickleball, I could care less. That's not what this whole thing is about. It's about just keeping the park safe. If we have kids running around playing, what was it?
Capture the flag.
Yeah, you know, let them have fun. There is not a hammer that is waiting to enforce this issue. It gives us the
Gives you the ability to enforce it.
yes, because we have nothing to really enforce. We have a sign in the park, we can't enforce signs, not without laws or ordinances. I just think it would be too restrictive for us to put an actual time or describe dusk to dawn more intimately. Dusk is sunset, dawn is sunrise. That's what I've always known it as to be. And we just use that for the enforcement side of when we need to remove somebody from the park for safety reasons. That's what this whole thing is about. It's not to pick out on anybody, it is to make sure that the park stays safe, but it gives us the authority to be able to enforce it.
Is there any thought about just changing it? I guess I agree, dusk to dawn. Maybe just changing it to sunrise to sunset. Is there a problem with there? I guess it's the same thing, but.
No, I was just going by terminology that other
Right.
municipalities were using.
And I'd
that's
be
all.
familiar with that too. I was just thinking, trying to make it a little easier, but.
Yeah.
Sunrise and sunset would be fine, I think from a practical standpoint. You know, anybody that's a hunter knows that, you know, you can't hunt before 30 minutes before sunset or 30 minutes after sunset or 30 minutes before sunrise, right? And
those are published times.
yeah, I mean, you know, sunrise and sunset's published by I think the Naval Observatory or the NOAA or somebody, you know, they're defined sunset and sunrise times. If there's a concern that dusk to dawn doesn't mean sunrise to sunset, then I think making that change is reasonable.
Yeah, I understand it, but maybe there is, after Mr. Larson's comments, some confusion there. I recently learned what twilight meant too, so I understand that. I always thought it was dark.
I saw the movie.
I blame attorneys on this.
And I do think, you know, we talked about this a little bit last time, but I think it's still helpful to kind of mention, you know, there is some discretion involved as deputies do their job. And I think I used this example last time, but it's not unlike a speed limit, right? If you get pulled over for going 3 miles an hour over the speed limit, the deputy has the discretion to ask you to slow down and let you go with a warning, right? Just because that speed limit is there and could be enforced doesn't mean it has to be. And so, you know, again, I think as Sergeant Anderson pointed out, there's not a hammer waiting to drop. You know, they won't be stalking the parks at night waiting to bust kids playing capture the flag. But certainly if there's a group of kids there, you know, hanging out around the restroom building and, you know, potentially doing vandalism, they'll have that tool to say, hey, it's illegal to be in the park.
No, we've
after
done a
sunset.
lot of this stuff in just planning commission and stuff. It's like people call and complain about something going on with development. And Kurt would bring something to planning commission saying, well, we can't enforce it because there's nothing in our books that says we can. So we add it to our code and now we have something enforceable.
Awesome, okay.
And again, I'll remind everybody too, for any lighted facilities like a Wagner Farm Park, the ordinance specifically says if it's posted otherwise, you know, for instance, if the basketball court's lit until 10 p.m. and it's posted as 10 p.m., you can be out there. So for those areas that are intended to be used after dark, of which we do have some in town, those will be fine for any permitted activity too. So if there's an event in the park, a Christmas tree lighting ceremony, for instance, will not be illegal because it's a permitted activity at the park after dark.
Come down on it.
So that's, anyway, so there's some of those provisions there to try to be reasonable, and certainly, as you all know, as we adopt code changes, sometimes you adopt a code that sounds great, and then when you go to enforce it, you learn a little bit, and you come back and make an adjustment as needed, but.
And we do have an enforceable like curfew on the books, don't we?
We used to.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Okay, trustee, we generally sound supportive. Is any amendments or?
I would support the amendment of changing it to sunrise, or from sunrise to sunset, just to add a little more specificity to the actual language.
Well, sunset to sunrise.
Well, depends on how you look at it,
Sunset to
open or
sunrise.
close, yeah.
Yes.
I support that too. Is anyone opposed to that? Staff, anything to add about, or 30 minutes is, or do you wanna keep it
I
at?
think it's fine, sunset to sunrise.
Okay. Yeah, I support that. Is anyone opposed to that?
Nope.
Okay, well, with that amendment, sounds like we're all supportive. Would anyone like to move on this?
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
I move to approve ordinance 1311, an ordinance of the town board of the town of Berthoud, amending the Berthoud Municipal Code regarding the hours of public parks, open space, recreational areas, and permitting to grant exclusive use thereof.
And that's with the amendment to change the wording to sunset to sunrise for closure hours?
Yes.
Is there a second on that?
Second.
All right, trustee Sorcelli has moved, trustee Murphy has seconded. Is there any final discussion on this? Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Trustee Ayers,
Yes.
trustee Hardy,
Yes.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
trustee Sorsali,
Yes.
Mayor Hurst.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Now we'll move on to agenda item number 6, and that's the authorization of Newell Farm purchase, and this is also a public hearing, and this will be introduced by Attorney Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Carsbeck. Mayor Carsbeck and members of the Board of Trustees, you have in front of you ordinance number 1312, which is really a final step, almost to the finish line with the Newell Farm purchase. This ordinance is required by state statute. Interestingly enough, the purchase of a park does require that the board formalize that through an ordinance. And that ordinance is presented for you here. It cites those statutory references, and it does describe the property, the purchase price, and the manner of that purchase, all of which are required by statute. I would be happy to answer any questions on this. I see that it is advertised for public hearing, so after public hearing, I would recommend that you approve this ordinance.
Thank you. Any questions, trustee, for Attorney Smith? Okay, I'll open it up to the public now for public hearing portion here. Did we have an opportunity for anyone to sign up for this, clerk? Do we have a sign up sheet? And even if you didn't have a chance to sign up, I'll just call on you afterwards. Okay, we have no one signed up. Would anyone in the audience here wish to speak to this? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for deliberation. How does everyone feel about this? Makes sense to me. Might be the easiest public hearing. All right, well, we're all in support. Would anyone like to move on this?
Sure. I move to approve ordinance 1312, an ordinance of the town board of the town of Berthoud authorizing the purchase of real property located at 236 East State Highway 56, Berthoud, Colorado.
Second.
Okay, the motion is made by trustee Hardy, seconded by trustee Murphy. Is there any final discussion on this? Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Trustee Ayers,
Yes.
trustee Hardy,
Yes.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
trustee Sorsali,
Yes.
Mayor Hurst.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for showing up. I thought you were gonna come up and speak, but I wanted to apologize for you guys not being noticed about this, so thank you for showing up.
No
I'm
problem.
glad it went smoothly.
And thank you for your vision, we appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the introduction of the ordinance adopting codes by reference, and this is by our town planner, Kurt Freeze.
Okay, so this is a first reading, so I think the purpose of this is obviously if there's any questions or the public has any concerns, then bring it back to you on December 13th for kind of to revise those or answer those questions as well. And obviously, you know, if you have any questions tonight. But this is adoption of a number of codes by reference. As you see in your packet, the write-up, about 3 years ago, we did this, and that's because the code cycles are every 3 years for each code. Now, they are somewhat offsetting some of the codes, you know, the energy code and the building code are in different years. But the International Code Council essentially updates the codes every 3 years. And so we've made a commitment that every 3 years, right around this time, hopefully for the beginning of the next year, we're gonna come back and make these updates. And in this case, you know, we're updating the building code, the energy code, the electrical code, the pool and spa code, the gray water code, oh man, there's two or three more. There's each one is like 1,000 pages. There's a giant code book, as you know, the fire code was adopted earlier this year. So that's what we're here tonight to talk about. Some of the changes of the codes were really every 3 years. Usually it depends on the code cycle. A lot of the times, every 3 years there'll just be an update or they'll just clean up language. So in this year's case, the electrical code, the building code, like the pool and spa code, gray water code, those were really just cleanups. And so there's really very little major change. Except for in the building code, we're adding kind of wind zone requirements. So now there's gonna be some additional requirements for every building in town additional reinforcement, you know, on every single building, just because we're, as I think everybody knows, we get a lot of wind here. We wanted to update that to a lot higher standard. But otherwise, the rest of those codes are somewhat minor updates that we're estimating would maybe cost $500 a house from the current code cycle. That's about 3 years old. The energy code is the major update this year that is happening. So that's, you know, that's about a $3,500 just for a typical suburban house here that you'd find in all of our new subdivisions. That's how much of the change it would be. There's things like dimmer lights and just some other things that are being added on. It's not as major as the last time we did this when the town was far behind on the energy code, and we went to the 2018 with some amendments that we worked on with Energy Logic. But those are the major changes, and you know, the positive thing here on all these code updates is that we will now essentially be matching Larimer County, Boulder County, Fort Collins, Longmont, and Loveland. So all of those jurisdictions have in the last year made these updates, and the amendments that you see in these updates are mirrored from the Larimer County communities. Because they work and they have a lot larger staff. We use ProCode and they do a really great job, but you know, Fort Collins, Larimer County, they have a lot more resources than we do, and they've been putting this into practice and seeing what's worked in the last year, and so we're adopting exactly their updates. This is also beneficial to builders because it's the same thing here as it is in Loveland or Fort Collins, where they're also likely building now. I don't know of any of the smaller communities that have gone to these yet, so we will be kind of one of the first smaller communities in Larimer County to kind of go to some of these code updates. The other thing I should mention is I know our former trustee was kind of big on the kind of shepherd this, but the state is now requiring in 2025 to come up to each community will have to come up to the latest 3 years off the latest energy code, so we'll be well in front of that. We're just a year behind on the energy code anyway. And what we updated before was we were ahead of things with amendments with Energy Logic, so now we're really keeping track every year. So that's what we're trying to do every 3 years is just update and inform. We've already informed all the builders that they should prepare. So on January 13th, because we need 30 days for this, everything that comes in will have to meet these code requirements or they're not gonna get a CO. We're not gonna process it. So hopefully that explains everything. You know, if there's any specific requirement, we have ProCode, I think is on the Zoom call too. But we can get you a really specific answer for one of those things. But again, the code books, if you stack them up, would probably be like that tall. So so we'll need a little, that's why I'm saying that to preface that is, you know, we just need a little bit of time to go through them. I think Sean understands because he's an architect.
Right. Thanks. Any questions for Planner Freeze or ProCode?
You know, it just seems like 3 years wasn't that long ago.
Do you have anything in there that you'd like to push a little harder than we're already pushing? Or does you hear anything from planning and zoning? It's kind of nice to be on the leading edge of things, but if we're back in the middle, I guess that's a good thing.
I really don't think so. I think maybe the next code cycle, we might think about upgrading our EV charge. So we're requiring the EV charging stations. We're like the first, other than Boulder, to do so. You know, we may think about amending that in another year or two as the technology gets better and the cost comes down to really get rid of the level 1 and just go to a level 2 or 3 as a requirement. But I think we're maybe a year or two away from doing that because it's a big cost. However,
Level
there is
1's
a lot
just the
of
110,
grants.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's really low.
We should definitely do that.
So that's something we might consider later on as the cost starts to come down. We have been getting a lot of pushback from every single commercial and multifamily developer, but they are doing it because we're not giving them COs unless they do. So.
We were, when we did adopt that, gosh, maybe it was 3 years ago. We were,
like second.
I think we were, right on the leading edge of
Yeah.
requiring charging stations and charging station infrastructure in new single-family residences as well. So not the charging station itself, but requiring the conduit and the capacity of the panel and all those things to be able to easily pull and add that, as well as passive solar infrastructure as well.
Yep.
We were already pretty far ahead in that one.
Yep, we are, and honestly, right now, with things going down, probably solar permits are our number one permit, so.
Well, how much work, if the board agreed, how much work would it be? Could you do that in the meantime to just get rid of the level one? I mean, from an EV owner, it seems almost pointless just to have level one in there. It's just an outlet.
I think it's like 3 weeks away, right? I can probably research that and make an amendment if you'd like to level 2 or level 3. I mean, all the language is there, so just.
Level 2 is just 220, so you should have.
Removing that option. So,
Any other questions?
I got some.
Trustee Murphy.
Not necessarily questions, but well, maybe one. Just starting with it, I really appreciate you guys updating all the codes up to 2021. I know what a massive process that is, even in the easy years. Have you guys taken a look at the appendices CB, CC, RB, and RC, which involve solar ready and net zero?
we have, but what specific things are you interested in?
I'm just interested in the whole enchilada.
Those were the appendices that we added 3 years ago that most very few communities ever have. And so we're still adopting those, but we're carrying those forward, so the updates to those appendices will continue forward in this update.
Okay. And then just the bill you were referencing, HB 22-1362, which kind of addresses those updates on a state level. Just participating in the cohort and stuff and talking to folks down in Boulder County, it seems like the general thrust of what state is moving towards is net zero new construction by 2030. I can probably have this discussion later, give you guys a break on this stuff, but it's something that is coming, I think, and it's something I hope you guys are aware of, and I'll probably be pushing some of this in the
Sure,
future.
and I think the ICC that does all of the code updates, I'm gonna assume that they're probably, as you're talking about, probably gearing up on the next code cycle for a really major change, and they'll start getting out there probably in the next 6 months, I would guess, or so we'll stay abreast of that, yeah. And
Okay.
one thing I forgot to mention is we did get some comments from like Habitat for Humanity, just because they're concerned about it's gonna be an extra $4,000 housing unit, they're obviously every penny is very important to them. In their case, they're doing almost all modular houses, which actually comes under a 2015 energy code, believe it or not, and it's permitted by the state, although we do help the state with those permits, but they're actually reviewed and permitted by the state. So that's really up to the state to update and until they go to a stick-built house, which I believe they're planning to do in Harvest 47 in a few years. But there's really no flexibility in the code. They're already in a different code, Habitat. Now, other affordable housing, that's I think a policy decision for the board, but from a code perspective, it's just very hard. It's almost impossible to. put an
Sorry, I'm
exception.
trying to turn this on.
So it's okay.
Absolutely.
So.
Any other questions for Kurt or ProCode? I have a question for you, Trustee Murphy. Is there anything in that you were just talking about that seems achievable in the next month for the net zero to kind of get the ball rolling?
I wouldn't say in the next month, and I wouldn't put that on you guys, but in general, looking at the forecast for kind of the next 8 years, we really need to continue to keep pace with the code updates, which we will, along with these kind of progressive elements, because the state is really pursuing on kind of a higher level of how we can decarbonize kind of the building that's going on, at least on new construction. Doesn't necessarily address existing buildings as far as I know, but it's something to be aware of and something to pursue. Talking to the Boulder County communities and kind of their planners down there, they all foresee net zero by 2030 as achievable. It's just kind of getting there that's the hard part, so.
Okay.
It's an ongoing discussion.
I know Denver's the one I know of off the top of my head, but that had committed to a net zero by 2030 goal, and they've got whole committees of folks trying to prepare and propose code amendments to make that possible. Certainly it would be nice to piggyback on efforts of bigger jurisdictions like
Sure.
Denver or Boulder. And it'd be even better if the state would take a leadership role in that
Yeah.
code development process.
I think a lot of
Resources
the
they
the
have.
efficiency things, to some it might get a bad rap of, oh, this just increases the cost of already unaffordable housing. I think in this case, well, one, it may or may not, just depends on the profit, I guess, how much the home's going, it might just eat into their profit, but it might not increase the sale of the home price. It kind of dictated by the developer, or the market, I should say. But it also, in the long run, is saving the homeowner a lot of money if you can, you don't have to heat a lot less, like an old 1904 house like me, where half of it goes out. You can save a lot of money by having an efficient home, so it's kind of good for the homeowner in the long run. Okay, well, that was it for me.
We'll try to stay on top of it and no matter what happens, and Energy Logic is headquartered here and I said before, so.
Have you reached out to them for any additions?
We really didn't have to this time because all the other communities had already kind of, since we waited a year for this update, have already adopted it, so all the issues have germinated, so that was kind of the plan. And so we're basically on the same things as Fort Collins, we're on the exact same amendments as Fort Collins and Loveland.
Okay.
Larimer County, so all of those problems are basically fixed with their amendments, so.
Great. Well, just real quick, I'm gonna open it up to the public here to see if anyone wishes to speak to this. Okay, seeing none. Sounds like we're all supportive. All right, thank you. I don't think we have a vote on this, right? I think that was just an update. Nope, we're actually adopting by reference, my apologies. Okay, so we need to schedule a public hearing here. Would anyone like to move on that?
I will move to schedule a public hearing for the purpose of adopting codes by reference as provided by ordinance 1313 and ordering notice of such hearing to be published in accordance with CRS section 31-16-203.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, trustee Ayers has moved on this. Trustee Murphy has seconded. Clerk, may I have a roll call vote, please?
Trustee Ayers,
Yes.
trustee Sorsali,
Yes.
trustee Hardy,
Yes.
trustee Murphy,
Yes.
Mayor Karsberg.
Yes, okay, thank you. Move on to our final agenda item tonight, and that'll be the 2023 annual budget update by Administrator Kirk.
Thank you, Mayor Karsbeck. I'll just go through a couple of brief slides, information that was included in your packet, as well as the comments or questions that I received from trustees after the last meeting. And while Clerk Samore works to get that going, the short summary is that what was included in your packet was an updated budget document that included some of the changes that we will discuss here in just a minute. Where the majority of the changes are, the big change is the changes in our 2022 estimates. So that's this fiscal year. But as the year gets farther along, we have better data about where we think we're gonna land. So we were conservative in our early budget estimates. We've made some conservative adjustments based on actual expense and revenue numbers. So what we proposed in the budget for next year, but that is effectively the closeout of this year, is that we would collect a little more than 3 million in additional revenue across all funds. Those are outlined in this little graphic here, but this is just a screenshot from what was in your packet. So a little more than $3 million in total additional revenue, $624,000 less expense than what we estimated in the last budget document, which would leave us with a total estimated ending fund balance of a little over $101 million across all town funds. And then one of the big changes that we made, and I just put a note in here so I wouldn't forget to mention it, there was $1 million budgeted this year for the bike park. We've spent some of that and we'll spend some of that before the end of the year, but the majority of that expense will occur in 2023, so there's a fairly significant change in the budget to move that $1 million from this year to next year. So it doesn't really change the bottom line of the fund because the expense is still occurring, it's just we're planning for the majority of that to occur next year. And we did add a little bit to deal with some scope changes that you guys already approved. From a comments and questions standpoint, there were some good questions received, so I'll try to address these relatively briefly and certainly can dig in as much detail as you'd like. The first was there's a significant drop in expected revenue in our source of supply fund. That's our raw water dedication fund. That's driven entirely by what we're expecting to be a drop in building next year and what we're planning for. We talked about that quite a bit last meeting. The other is that so that's a portion of that decrease. The other is that when we changed the raw water dedication price last year and the year before, we had a lot of pre-purchase of water prior to that new price taking effect. And that's, as some of the trustees that were on the board prior to April of this year will remember, we had kind of a run on water as a result of when you adopt that new water cost by ordinance. There's this kind of 30-day time frame where builders were allowed to come in and buy water for lots they already had approved. And so we got a big chunk of revenue from that. And we don't expect that to occur again next year. But it may, and if it did, it would just mean that we'd collect a whole lot more revenue if the board decided that we wanted to increase that dedication fee again. So again, primary drop in revenue is both a reduction in expected building and not expecting a big chunk of water to be bought all at once as a result of a price change.
Chunk of not buying water, right? They're just giving us money, right?
They're buying the right to water for their
Right to our
for
water.
the house, yeah. There was a request or a suggestion from trustee Murphy that we add money to the budget for crosswalk lights. We can certainly accommodate that. I mentioned before, we didn't have we didn't have a long list of places, but we know we've discussed a few, so we included money for at least two rapid rectangular flashing beacons, the blinky lights, as Mayor Carspect calls them. And so if we went from 20 to 80, that would be enough for roughly 8. It kind of depends on where they're located. Obviously, the costs fluctuate. The ones here in front of Hayes Market, those are about 16,000. So it kind of depends, but 10 to 15 generally for those. So if the board would like, we could make that adjustment, or we can finalize the plan for where we want to do that, and you guys could make a supplement mid-year next year. It's kind of your call. There was requests for funding for committees. We have funded the HPAC with a few $1,000s each year historically, and that's primarily to buy plaques for historically designated homes. We have not budgeted money for the Port Committee and the Tree Committee. We have budgeted money for the Youth Advisory, and so they have a little bit of money to use for giveaways at activities or events they plan. They buy pizza for their meetings and things like that. With permission from town staff, but we did include $1,500 per committee in this draft budget. There was a suggestion that maybe $5,000 was a good number. I don't know that it's practically a big difference for us. $5,000 is a lot to spend. When you start thinking about what are the things that might be spent on. If it was shirts for the committee members, things like that, we'd have to buy a whole lot of shirts to get to $5,000. It would even leave, we think, if each committee member received a couple of shirts as a result of their service on the committee, and then we had a policy where we would pay for registration for conferences or seminars they might want to attend. We still think we could probably get there with $1,500, but if the board prefer a little more, we could do that as well. There's a request to increase sidewalk maintenance funding. And most of these are from trustee Murphy, so feel free to jump in and interrupt me at any point if you'd like. So I don't mean to.
You're doing great.
I don't mean to talk as if they're like from some faceless entity, but let's see. So sidewalk maintenance. The request that trustee Murphy made was to increase and allocate additional money into specifically Fund 51. We do budget money for sidewalk maintenance from a couple of different locations or different pots of money, so we do have about $500,000 planned or budgeted for sidewalk maintenance. If the board wanted to increase that total specifically in Fund 51, we can. Sorry, I'm trying to get to the right place here.
You said $500,000 budgeted?
Across a couple of different funds. So the 1998 1% fund has some money for sidewalk maintenance. That's the big chunk, $300,000. We do include money for sidewalk replacement in the recreational marijuana tax fund as well, for 150. So I was thinking last year we had 350 and 150 for a total of 5. This year we have 300 and 150, so a total of 450.
And some of that's just the cost share, right? Or is that all, like we're putting that towards?
Some of that would fund cost share applications for residents. Those are typically pretty inexpensive when they do come through. Where we primarily spend that money, we talked about this a little bit at the last meeting, we do our asphalt maintenance project. We spend $1 million on asphalt, like this year we did Hillsdale and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the street in Gateway, but the one that used to feel like a roller coaster and is now nice and smooth. And the state streets there by Ivy Stockwell. When we do that asphalt work, we go through and upgrade the sidewalks adjacent to, and that's where we typically spend that money. That said, we did budget money this year to prepare a 5-year maintenance plan for sidewalks.
That was part of the retreat,
replacement
right?
plan. Yep, that was something the board asked for. It was a priority that was identified during the retreat. And we do have money budgeted for that. And so I think my suggestion would be, if the board's comfortable with this, leaving the money that we have budgeted now to address the sidewalk replacements that we do as part of our asphalt project. And then obviously we'll have a much more clear kind of 5-year plan as we go through and update the last evaluation we did, where we had an engineering firm, they go out and they literally evaluate all the sidewalks in town for condition and safety and those kinds of things. And then they'll help us prioritize which of those need to get done first, and then we can kind of set. It's a little bit like changing the dial, right? We can say, well, if we spend $1 million a year, how much can we get done? If we spend $100,000 a year, how much can we get done? The last go round, I don't know if I mentioned this last meeting or not, but the last time we did a sidewalk evaluation, the cost to bring all the sidewalks in town up to a kind of current reasonable standard, I think was about $13 million. So no matter what we do, it'll be, and depending how the board wants to proceed, obviously there's some big policy decisions in there we've talked about in the past too, who's responsible for the replacement of those sidewalks. But nevertheless, my suggestion would be that we wait to modify the budget until we finish that 5-year plan, beyond what we already have expected as part of our asphalt maintenance projects. And then last, the cause behind the increase in the sheriff contract, as well as kind of timing for approval of the statement of work. Last year, we actually approved this year's statement of work in January of 2022. The month after we approved the budget, we could do that at the same time. I think there's good sense to doing that. The increase in the sheriff's contract expense is not for additional personnel this year. We're proposing to maintain kind of the same staffing levels and those things. It's really just the cost of living, consumer price index kind of driven increase. It's about 8%. Which we all know inflation has driven costs up pretty significantly. This is from the proposed statement of work that we can bring to you on the December 13th meeting. When you approve the budget, we can approve this at the same time, which I think is a good suggestion and a reasonable thing to do. But it's the breakdown in our agreement that kind of says, here's what you're paying for. So a sergeant, 2 corporals, 7 deputies, a desk deputy, SROs, which the school district pays for half of that, and we pay for the other half, school resource officers, and then half of an investigator. So there is some overhead expense in there that we pay to the county, obviously with the county sheriff's department managing all their payroll and all their HR and all that other stuff. There's a proportion of expense there for them. Anyway, that's kind of the extent of the changes or the responses to questions. Trustee Grace did ask me a question last week verbally, and I made the mistake of not writing it down, thinking he would be here tonight, and then he's not, and so.
Is it about, my only question when I was sick was about the development Vantage going back and redoing their sidewalk?
Yes, thank you, that was the question he asked, the question that Trustee Grace asked, and I assume as a result of conversations with you, was could we go back and increase the width of the sidewalk that was installed on the north end of Vantage that runs parallel to the handy ditch? And I think the answer to that is no, and that's because it's not, that sidewalk is not owned and maintained by the town. It's within the Metro District's approved landscape plans and they built it, they're responsible for installing it and maintaining it. And it runs on what's effectively, I guess it's public property in the sense that it's owned by the Metro District, but it's not owned by the town.
Is it something we could contribute to?
That's what I'm saying, yeah. I a heavy hand on them probably wouldn't work well, but you said, you give us the permission, we'll redo it, it was our mistake in the first place.
Yeah.
That's a trail, it's not a sidewalk, you know? We treated it like a trail.
And for what it's worth, I will say, I understand your position, but I think it's important, I don't know that we made a mistake per se. It was approved by the board when the board approved those plans, but it was a long time ago before I think kind of the
We realized we didn't
expectations
have
changed.
a minimum trail standard, so we could, you know,
Right, but again, those plans got approved like nine years ago or something.
yeah,
right?
okay, I don't say the mistake might be with staff, at some point, we never considered a trail should be wider than a sidewalk. That's where I think the
Yes, when
mistake
those
is.
plans were
Yeah,
approved.
and then-
Certainly our standards have changed now, so new developments, that wouldn't be the case. But-
Did we adopt new standards though? I don't think we still don't have any.
No, we have approved trail standards
do
in
now?
our in our open space master plan.
So, but that didn't catch Vantage with those somehow.
That, because again, their construction plans were approved
Before that.
long before we made those changes.
So could we go talk to them amenably and saying, as both lovers and trying to do the best for recreation, let's work together and fix this, cause it'll look really weird when we have a 5-foot trail go to an 8 out of nowhere.
We did discuss that with them. It won't go from nowhere,
Midway through, I should say. Right?
yeah, we did discuss that with them prior to them building the next phase, and they were not interested in going back and widening the current phase.
It's too bad.
Perhaps if we paid for it, but they have installed irrigation, all kinds of things, it would be much more expensive than just boring a little bit wider sidewalk, I think.
Really surprising and too bad that they're not willing to work on us with recreation, but I think if we could put a hand out and say, well, we'd put the money to do this.
Again, for what it's worth, I think, there are a lot of things that were in their approved construction plans that we wouldn't approve today.
You're right.
But it was, again, that was long before.
Yes, that's a good
most of
point.
us,
Sorry.
really, any of us were here.
Right.
And they are working with us on some other very expensive changes to things like major water transmission mains and those kinds of things. And we are agreeing to fund a portion of them and they are agreeing to work with us on them. Although that's been a really challenging thing to do as well, but we don't want them to install underground water lines that we would not approve today, despite the fact that they were approved before, so. They understand that, they're working with us on it reluctantly, but they are, I think this sidewalk, and I don't wanna speak on their behalf, I'm happy to reach out to them and say, hey, look, it came up during our budget discussions. Is there interest or willingness if we paid for it, to widen that sidewalk?
But to a trail. So I guess I'm just a little miffed that they're not interested if we're gonna put up the money. Like, I was riding on there and a lady was walking her dog and she had to get off so I could get my little one wheel past her. It seems pretty crazy for something that's gonna connect two reservoirs. And I'd hope they'd be willing, if we came in there with the money, and they'd just be amenable to make this more of a public recreation. And not kind of,
It seems
I'm
like
coming in a little
reasonable
hard right
request.
now, but I have a feeling that they are taking advantage of the loophole, which makes me feel like they're taking advantage of us.
I don't think there's a loophole,
An
again,
old
their
standard.
plans were approved,
Right,
under a standard that was in existence years and years ago.
right.
So, I wouldn't see that as a loophole, I think they're just saying, look, this is what we bought when we bought the subdivision and intended to build it, and you're just increasing costs for something that was already approved.
But if we go in it, it's not increasing anything on them, right? If we're paying for it.
Yeah, only in the sense that maybe there's not a direct cost, right? There's indirect costs associated with all the changes that need to be made with landscaping, and irrigation that's installed, and managing and monitoring the work. If we said, hey, you're not gonna have to do any of it, we'll cover 100% of the cost, deal 100% with your irrigation system, we'll repair anything we break, then I wouldn't see why they would say no.
Could we do that? If the board's okay with that? I mean, otherwise we're just gonna stare at my mouth shut here. I'm a little whiffed by them. I wouldn't wanna work with someone that's doing that. I mean, okay.
I haven't written up there yet.
What?
But, yeah, I haven't written up there yet, but yeah, it's just nice to get our trail systems consistent. I mean, here we've been working on closing all the little 10-foot, 20-foot gaps between developments, and now we've got a completed section, but it looks weird.
Park that's a dust pit, if you want to take that.
Oh, we gotta, we won't be able to, yeah. We'll open this up to public comment here in a bit. Okay, great. I agree with all yours.
I don't mind explaining kind of my thought process.
Would the
I'd love to
1,500
hear-
work for you, or are you pretty set on the 5,000 for committees? Is there a reason?
Well, I've got multiple points here.
Okay.
Thank you, Administrator Kirk, for bringing all those up. I thought it was a great explanation. On the crosswalk lights, just to begin with, I think we could definitely see multiple locations. And if we're only getting one or two for 20 grand, I think there's multiple locations that we really could hit in town. Prioritizing Mountain Avenue and then school locations, but that could be part of the sidewalk maintenance plan. And maybe discuss with that. As for committee support, and maybe you could speak to this, Administrator Kirk. We're requesting for the tree committee specifically $5,000 for this year. I don't expect that to be a continual expense, but is there any issue with having it budgeted at 5 to allow the committees some flexibility under that kind of limit?
Yeah, I think the answer to that financially is it's not a big deal. I mean, you know, in the context of our total budget, this is not something we can absorb. My only concern is one, the committees don't typically spend money, right? If we spend money, it would be from town funds with support of the committees or the approval of the town board, right? The committees make recommendations to the board and the board approves those things. And so there's an interesting kind of balance between, you know, oftentimes the committees they wanna get stuff done, right? And they say, we wanna get this done, we wanna do it, we're gonna put this thing together, we're gonna get it out there, we're gonna get the materials done. That's just not typically how we've operated, and that's not typically the role of the committees. And so providing a larger budget starts to kind of create that situation where it's like, what are we using this money for? And do they have then kind of the they don't really have the authority to spend the money, I guess is what I'm saying, right? And so again, most of the things that we spend money on as a result of the committee's work comes out of our normal budget. That said, I think having some money for trainings, for, you know, food at meetings, which I don't think is an issue, you know, shirts, giveaways, like, you know, the tree committee often will help man a booth at birthday days and those kinds of things, and handing out materials and those kinds of things, I don't think is a significant issue. But that's really my only concern is, you know, at what point we budget the money, if there's not a really specific use. I also don't, selfishly maybe, I don't want our staff to have to get into a debate with the committees about like, well, that's not really like your money to go out and spend and do whatever it is you guys think is important, because that's not really what the committees do. The committees make recommendations to the board, generally speaking. Does that make sense?
So just to speak to that, on larger items, you know, would it be preferred from your perspective and staff's perspective that they come before the board and actually present their ideas and we approve it?
Yeah, either that or the town staff would make that request, or if it was something that, you know, a good example I think the tree committee's talked about in the past is, you know, some updated kind of marketing and informational materials. You know, we have budget to do that within the existing forestry budgets and other things, but that should go through staff, and it should, you know, our forester should be a part of that. And then we can work with the committee to help with layout and content, but we would actually go through and handle the printing and dealing with the expenses of all that. You know, I think it's appropriate for town staff to do that. You know, like the forester specifically in that instance, right?
I can appreciate that, and so I would be satisfied with the 1,500, and I appreciate you bringing out the line item for the tree committee. And then the last point on sidewalk maintenance, I noticed we didn't really have an increase in budget from any of those locations. Aside from obviously the money allocated for the plan that we've set out to do this coming year. My thought was an additional 200,000 would be able to be drawn down from that account. So we can hit the ground running, hopefully, once we get this plan with additional funds to show that we are serious about this. I'm open to, you know, thoughts from the rest of the board on whether that's an acceptable number. I thought it was reasonable to have that for this year, but I am flexible with maintaining it as is. But I'd like to hear your guys' thoughts, so.
Right, I agree with you. I think it would help that we talked about it this year at retreat too, to kind of boost that up. That's just my thoughts, so.
Is there any
We can
kind
do
of, sorry, is there any kind of idea, what, 200 you said?
200 additional from that.
Ballpark, what would that get done?
Well, that's an interesting question right now, just because of construction prices. We used to estimate about $6 or $6.50 a square foot for sidewalk, and more recent cost estimates are in the $9 a square foot range. I mean, they've gone up dramatically, and that might level off. But a few years ago, for instance, when we did the Safe Routes to School project, which was sidewalk, eliminating some sidewalk gaps on Welch from First Street, well, really Third Street, I guess. New sidewalk from First Street over to Second, up Second Street to Welch, down Welch to Seventh, and then some gap elimination up Seventh all the way to Bunyan. It was about a $450,000 project. So it depends. If it's one long continuous like new sidewalk, it's probably, I don't know, a quarter mile maybe. And a lot of that is dependent on where you do it, right? Because the more stuff you gotta mess with and move out of the way, the more expensive it becomes. But yeah, I mean, $200,000, I would guess, is probably a quarter mile of new sidewalk somewhere. Broken up around town, it's a little more expensive than if it was all one continuous run in native dirt. But
I'll look for advantage.
I feel like I appreciate the idea with that because it was a huge priority for us in our strategic planning. And so I'm hearing that we want to show some goodwill and effort toward that mission to update our sidewalks. But I also know we need some more direction from staff on how to be strategic in sidewalk replacement. I think what I would just recommend is that we try to find a way to expedite the planning process, and we'll have to revisit the budgeting once we know the cost of replacement and how we're gonna approach that. But I do think it's a critical measure for 2023 to start having a bigger impact on sidewalk repair and replacement. Is that kind of coincide with what you're saying? I feel like I'd hate to just throw out an ambiguous number because perhaps we'd want to double our sidewalk repairs, and that would have to be the next year's budget. I don't know how that works, but I know it's an important thing for this board.
And it could be this coming year's budget. If everything went really smoothly and we were done with a 5-year plan by say April, and we said, hey, we think our first year we wanna spend $500,000 and here's where we're gonna spend it all. You guys could approve that project and we could make that adjustment at the supplement, which we've done in the past. So there's some flexibility there for us to add it in as that plan gets finalized.
And it'll get finalized next year? I think the benefit of having it in there is just something we can point at and say throughout the year with staff to keep you up on it,
Yep.
Some things do fall through, but so if we don't have it in there, then we have nothing to point at. But
So we do have the money budgeted for the plan,
Okay.
just not the execution of the plan, because we don't have the plan yet. But if you wanted to add money for the execution of the plan now, we could do that within Fund 51, that's the 1998 1% sales tax fund. I think there's room to do that there as a placeholder more than anything else. And I don't think that's not out of line with what we've done in the utility funds. We talked about that a lot. We're underway on master plans. We know we're gonna have expense associated with that, wanna hit the ground running. I think your logic is sound, so. I don't
As
think
long
that's
as
an
that
issue either.
number's not restrictive
No,
at some
I
point
get
where
your
we
point.
say, yeah, we only budgeted this excess of 200,000, so we're gonna stick with that when we could do more. So as long as it's not restrictive and it's more of a placeholder, I'd be satisfied with that.
And that was my thought, is the plan is gonna drive this and how fast things are moving ultimately. This, I thought, was just a good gesture, so we are actually adding to the budget for that, regardless of whether it's spent this year or not. But if we have the plan in place, we can hit the ground running with that much more cash on hand. That's my.
I agree. Alright. I think your points are aligned, I think. we just
Yeah, and I
want-
think your line of reasoning is really exactly the same what we did with the utility funds, so. don't see any issue making that modification, bringing that back to you on the 13th when you guys look at this for final approval.
Cool. Anything else?
Yeah. That's all right.
I liked all of them. Thank you for doing
The
that.
nitpicker over here.
And no, and I think
good stuff.
whether it's the 1,500 or the 5,000, I think it empowers committees. I definitely understand you wanna work with staff, right? This isn't your money, go out and do it your own, but it might help, not just shirts, but maybe some dinners, some other stuff, or just for the copies or the mailers and stuff. And I think it still should come before the board so we know what's going on, but that way they feel, oh, we have this agency, we have this 5,000 at least we can play with. But if it's 1,500 and you need to go above and go to the board, then so be it. But I think having a budget helps them with agency. And I talked to I don't wanna say the superintendent, someone at R2J, and that was their first question of, well, do they have a budget? This was years ago, and I remember saying, no, this committee doesn't have a budget, and he was talking about how budgets make them and feel empowered. And to me, I never thought about it that way, but it seemed kind of sensical afterwards, so I'm glad that we're tying a number to our committees. Anything else from the board? All right, I'll open this up to the public. Does anyone in the public like to speak to the budget process? Ms. Wilson?
I have a question about subdivisions and their sidewalks. Is this discussion about sidewalks and paying for it just in town, or is this including all the subdivisions around Berthoud?
Do you mean in Berthoud or outside of Berthoud city limits? This is about inside Berthoud city limits.
Okay, and then how are sidewalks taken care of outside budget, outside city limits?
Like county properties?
No, like within Heron Point.
Oh, you're within town limits.
Oh, okay,
So
that's
this
included.
goes with you, the nuances with the metro or an HOA, I don't know how to speak to that. Some of them are maintained by the metro, right? I don't know.
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way I could say it is anything in the city limits, all the subdivisions that you could probably name off the top of your head, Heron Point, Hammond Farm, Vantage, they're all in the town limits, right?
Okay,
They may have their own management associations that handle the metro district, that covers public spaces and their public areas within the neighborhood. Or an HOA, some subdivisions have HOAs, some have both. But in any case, they're still within the town limits, they still fall under our codes. Our current code says the maintenance and repair of the sidewalk is the responsibility of the adjacent property owner. So in areas where the sidewalk is owned by the metro district, in kind of street landscaping, for instance, within a metro district, their responsibility, or they have the responsibility for maintenance and replacement. If it's in front of a home, the homeowner has responsibility for maintenance and replacement. If it's in front of a business, the business owner has responsibility, or the property owner where that business is located has responsibility for maintenance. The caveat is that, again, when we go do road projects, we take on that responsibility and upgrade the sidewalks adjacent to the roads. So it's a little bit of both. I don't know if that's a clear answer or not, but I think
Do you wanna, and we don't have to do the 3 minute, do you wanna specify, do you have anything particular?
yes, I've tripped and fallen twice in this one particular area as I've gone for a walk. Could be my age, whatever, but anyway, there's a change in it. So do we put in a request to you, or do we ask the homeowner, would you please repair this
the ideal
sidewalk?
situation would be to reach out to the town and then we can notify the homeowner if a repair needs to be made.
Okay, great, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience? Okay, let's bring it back to the board. This was just informational, anything, right? Okay, anything else to add?
Direction, which I think I've gotten, so that's great.
Okay. And this will come back before us in December, right, for the
December
legal approval?
13th is the hopeful approval date.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for the whole process. I'm sorry I missed the last meeting, but yes, this has been really transparent and really thorough, just like every year you've been here, so appreciate it. Okay, next is our reports. Typically, we do reports at the end, but we're gonna have an executive session. That executive session is just informational. In an executive session, we don't make decisions, and we're not gonna bring anything back to the board tonight, so it'll just be informational. So we'll move on to reports, and then the board will adjourn from executive session. So we'll start off with, I don't know if there's an order, we'll start off with trustee Murphy.
Ooh, threw me off guard. Let's see here. No, I just had to say, I really appreciate the flex service, I've used it a lot. So moving forward on reapproving that contract, I really appreciate. We had tree committee last night. Some of the major topics of discussion, we kind of went into the tree question on private owners having to replace trees and a generalized opinion on that. And the committee's opinion, on the whole, was that we should be employing more carrots than sticks initially before we pursue anything beyond that. Just to give you a feel for that. And then looking into a tree sale for the town where we have reduced pricing. The actual agency we're getting that through, which would be Trees Across Colorado, is out of availability for this year, so it will not be happening this coming spring. At the earliest, we can get in line to do it in 2024. So that's on track as of right now. It's just gonna be waiting a while. I think that's all I've got.
Awesome, alright. Trustee Hardy.
Berthoud Main Street's doing their small business Saturday this weekend, this Saturday. If you shop downtown between 10 and 4, bring 3 receipts to me or Will or Mighty or whoever's gonna be sitting down at City Star between 10 and 4, bring us 3 receipts, we'll get you entered into a raffle for some really cool gift baskets of local businesses have all contributed a little something that look pretty neat. They're posted on our Berthoud Main Street website or Facebook page if you wanna go check them out, or you can come down to City Star Saturday and check them out. The other thing with that is, I don't know if Chris is gonna put this one in, but I'll put it in, it's Walt. The town of Berthoud is also doing something similar, purchasing receipts, bring them to the town hall. You can get entered in to win a $75 gift card from one of the local merchants. So I like to plug that, it's a pretty cool idea, it's a kickoff or spin-off from the old Berthoud Bucks. But now it's all being done down here at town of Berthoud. The other thing is the lighted Christmas parade, we'll have a special guest there that looks kind of familiar, not me. Maybe Lynn, not here, no. We'll have Santa Claus in the lighted parade, we've got about 10 or 12 participants right now. And a few more keep trickling in as we get closer to the date. So fire department's looking forward to it. And so it'll be a good time and see you all down at Fickle Park and we'll do a drawing down there for the gift baskets from Saturday. And then thanks for the bathrooms. I do have one minor complaint.
Right?
Driving westbound on Massachusetts, the bathroom light from that bathroom facing northeast is like having someone shining a flashlight in your face as you're driving down the street. It's pretty darn bright.
That shouldn't be the case, cause it should be dark sky and it shouldn't be shining out at the driver, so we'll take a look at it.
It's like a headlight shining at you.
It might not have been finished yet.
Could be, or it may just be the wrong light. Those are prefab restrooms, so it's possible it got delivered.
I mentioned it to Keith too in passing as we were talking about the parade, so.
I'm sure we can get that fixed up.
But yeah, so anyway, other than that, looks really cool, looks really nice. It's finally nice to have bathrooms in that park for the first time ever. So, but anyway, and we're still in the planning stages of Snowfest for January, so hopefully we'll get that all wrapped up and pulled together. We're getting our few sponsors in already and got a team or 2 registered, so we'll move forward and see how far we get with that. So that's about it.
Trustee Ayers.
I don't have anything tonight.
Okay, Trustee Soriselli?
I don't have anything.
Alright, my only official one is Administrator Kirk's review. Trying to shorten that down, and then Administrator Kirk, I asked if he had any specific questions he'd like to add, and he did have about 5, and they're really great questions that he pulled from other city managers and town administrators, just to get feedback from the board and from his own staff, a little more in depth. So that will come out early December, and I think we're gonna open this one up for a longer period of time, given the holidays, so it might be open over 2 weeks. Last year, we had 100% participation rate, so I think the longer we keep it open, we can get more people that might be out on vacation to come back and participate in it. So keep your eye out for that. I'll, of course, be sending out emails ahead of that, so we know in particular, just so it doesn't hit your spam or your junk inbox. For that, then I heard Trustee Murphy about the tree sale thing. Have you guys looked at the CSU extension? I know they have sales every year.
I I think we're gonna be exploring other options to see if it's possible. and we
I've
can
been
do
in there, cause they
something.
opened it up to residents too, so I could go in there and buy a tree. In fact, I've bought little ones in the past, they've all died admittedly, but I think, you know, they have their own grow houses, so if we did a big sale through them, we could get a really good deal. And then they grow them from seed ahead of time. That might be worth it.
What about the Forest Service or the tree farm?
Well, this is CSU Extension, this is their forestry, this is part of their forestry.
Cool.
So they have, yeah, this is out at their campus, they have a big facility for it, pretty cool. What else? Just wanna thank you, Trustee Hardy, for all your work on the parade and on Snowfest. Of course, we're gonna be taking over Snowfest this year, so that was a lot more work on Tim, and it's a lot of work in general. And he just throws me where he needs me to, so I'm just organizing the parade logistics as far as setting them up, but Tim's doing all really the hard work here, so shout out to you and thank you, cause last year that was really a cool event, and seeing the whole community come together over Main Street was really spectacular, so thank you for organizing that, and I think it'll be another great year. I presented to some Cub Scouts and they were super interested in forming a team, so hopefully I can link them up with you, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
If more teams wanna be added, they'll go to you, okay, cool. And that is it for me, so I'll turn it over to Steph.
Just a couple things for me tonight. Just to piggyback on what Trustee Hardy said, the Shop Local program, was really Walt and Cindy actually, took a big hand in putting that together. Kind of a fun opportunity to promote businesses. We could buy ads in the newspaper, trying to encourage people to shop downtown, but we think this is kind of a better way to utilize those dollars and both support local businesses by getting gift certificates and other products that we can give away as prizes for folks that if you spend at least $10 at a local business, you bring that receipt in, drop it in the drop box at Town Hall, then weekly we'll do a drawing at the end of each of the 4 weeks. And then all the receipts that get submitted will be entered to win a really awesome birthday goodie gift basket. So just kind of a fun way to do a little bit of support, and we've got I think the last count from Walt was we've got over 40 businesses that are participating with that we've been able to get gift cards and other things from, or products, so that's cool.
Cool.
We also another kind of fun opportunity this year, the Neighborhood Services Department, or what other folks might refer to as code enforcement, with support of other town staff, put together our inaugural, first annual always sounds weird to me, so inaugural holiday light contest for folks in town to do their best to decorate their homes. We'll have a little judging in mid-December and some prizes for People's Choice, best traditional light display, best use of inflatables, which was kind of fun.
That's gonna get crazy.
Most
Star's
magnificent
got a crazy one on that.
most magnificent miniatures. So if you have a storefront business category and you can't maybe do as big of a display, you could do a small display, or for apartments, townhomes, that kind of thing. And then the brightest birthday business. So Teresa, our neighborhood services
We're gonna blow our dark sky budget this year in a couple days.
The
fun
dark
side
sky exempts holiday lighting.
Yep, 4th of July holiday.
But she's out trying to round up businesses to participate. We have had a lot of submissions already for residences, so just kind of a fun.
Teresa's going around to businesses?
Mhm.
Okay.
Saying hi and encouraging them to participate in the light contest.
So I forgot to bring this up in reports, but I'm happy to just turn this over to her. I was trying to just work out directly with businesses in Northern Colorado landscaping, like I'm out of the way, but can you do a bulk deal on if I got a bunch of businesses? And I said, yeah, and they got the number down to like around 200 a business.
To decorate?
Yeah, and they would install and I think they'd even remove and hold it, but they'd be their lights. So it's a really good deal. And yeah, I just thought having a committee, or just the quickest way to do it is just to see if I could walk around on behalf of whatever holiday cheer. But I have some of brochures, maybe I could just hand over to Teresa.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool, awesome.
The entry deadline is December 1st, so if you wanna participate in the contest, the entry deadline is December 1st. It doesn't cost to participate or anything, you just have to fill out a form on our website.
I'm in, man, it's on. Can I throw a shout out to you, Chris, cause what you and Walt did for as far as the days to meet specific days for like a listening and work session with businesses and then having a separate one with nonprofits. That's the first time where we're doing kind of that too. So thank you for doing that. I think that's really interesting. And
Yeah, we
look forward to hearing from you guys what they say.
We've had some really good wall schedules, kind of regular, primarily associated with industrial businesses, but just an opportunity to kind of we call a little executive briefing from me about what's going on in town and just have breakfast burritos or, you know, a little breakfast spread for those that come. They can ask questions and you know, just make connections with Paul tonight. And certainly we invited you this time around, so
Yeah, I think we're
love to
open
have
up to
you
any trustee to
participate.
come in and listen.
And then as we were talking about scheduling that one, you know, we just had this kind of realization, we need to kind of do the same thing with all the nonprofit organizations in town. And so I say all, we're starting with a kind of a core group, but our hope is that we'll expand that to at least quarterly, where we just get together, have an opportunity to kind of share what's going on with the different organizations, ask questions, coordinate events and activities, but create kind of a regular meeting of groups in town, you know, Friends of the Library, Berthoud Local, Main Street, you know, Chamber of Commerce, you name it, right? There's kind of a long list that Walt and I put together.
Just a suggestion, it's your call, but I think you should just notice it as a public meeting and so all the trustees can attend.
We could do that.
Just like we do for the business appreciation breakfast, so that they can kind of see us, we can all hear from them.
Our hope, I think kind of in terms of format and content, is that we would have an opportunity to talk with them in a place where they feel like they could beat us up if they wanted to.
Oh, gotcha,
or
okay.
We could kind of share information
Yeah,
that maybe
sure.
they're not comfortable talking about with the public, but I think that maybe doing that at least once a year would be a good opportunity anyway,
Yeah.
to kind of get everybody together that way, so.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that's it for me tonight.
Exciting. Attorney Smith?
I don't have anything, Your Honor.
All right, well, that concludes reports. Thank you, everyone. Would anyone like to move us into executive session?
I'll do it. I move to enter into executive session pursuant to CRS section 24-6-402 4E1 to determine position relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing a strategy for negotiations and instructing negotiators. And the following details are provided for potential development incentives.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, trustee Ayers has moved on this. Trustee Hardy has seconded. Clerk, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Trustee Murphy?
Yep.
Trustee Zorzelli?
Yes.
Trustee Hardy?
Yes.
Trustee Ayers?
Yes.
Mayor.
Yes, okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone in the audience for sticking around the whole night.